When my husband of 35 years told me he was working late again, I believed him like I always did. Days later, I was lying in a hospital bed, overhearing his mistress tell my children she'd be inheriting everything soon. That's when I realized my whole life had been nothing but a beautiful glass castle built on quicksand. If you're watching this story unfold, be sure to subscribe and comment if you've ever had your trust shattered by someone you loved with your whole heart. Because trust me, what happens next will leave you speechless. The day it all began was ordinary, which is how catastrophe always arrives, disguised as just another Tuesday. I was preparing Richard's favorite pot roast, the one he'd praised for decades. My hands worked from memory, chopping carrots and potatoes while my mind wandered to the charity gala we'd be attending that weekend. After 35 years of marriage, for children, and building Harrington Enterprises from nothing into a real estate empire, we'd earned our place among Atlanta's elite. The kitchen phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Marianne from the hospital board. "Eleanor, darling, are you sitting down?" Her voice had that artificial sweetness people use when they're about to stick a knife in your back. "I thought you should hear it from a friend first." "Hear what?" I wiped my hands on my apron, that familiar dread seeping into my bones. "Richard was spotted at Chateau Bleu last night. With her." Marianne paused dramatically. "They were in the corner booth. You know the one." Yes, I knew the one. The corner booth at Chateau Bleu was where Richard had proposed to me in 1985. It was our special place, the restaurant we visited on every anniversary. Until 5 years ago, when suddenly Richard claimed the food had gone downhill. "Are you absolutely certain?" My voice remained steady, a skill perfected from years of maintaining appearances. "Eleanor," he had his hand on her thigh. She couldn't have been more than 35. I thanked Marianne for her concern and hung up. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman of 62 with carefully maintained blonde hair, skin that fought gravity with expensive creams, and eyes that had seen too much but pretended otherwise. This wasn't the first whisper, the first phone call. For 3 years, rumors about Richard and his executive assistant, Vanessa, had circulated through our social circle like poison. I'd ignored them all, denied them to my children, defended my husband to our friends. The pot roast simmered on the stove, filling the kitchen with a homey aroma that now seemed to mock me. I turned off the burner and walked upstairs to our bedroom, the master suite of our Buckhead mansion that had been featured in Southern Living twice. In our walk-in closet, I pushed aside Richard's custom suits until I found what I was looking for, a small black lockbox hidden behind his winter coats. The combination was our anniversary date. Inside lay documents I'd discovered months ago but had been too afraid to confront. A lease agreement for a downtown apartment I knew nothing about, receipts for jewelry never given to me, and hotel bills from weekends when Richard claimed to be at business conferences. And photographs. The kind no wife should ever have to see. I'd put it all back that day, pretending I'd never seen it, convincing myself that ignoring the truth would somehow preserve the life I'd built. The charity work, the social standing, the perfect family facade, all of it seemed too precious to sacrifice. But something about Marianne's call, about Richard taking that woman to our special place, broke something loose inside me. Perhaps it was knowing our children were growing suspicious. Perhaps it was the headaches I'd been having, the ones the doctor wanted to run some tests for. Whatever the reason, I found myself replacing the lockbox and walking downstairs with newfound resolve. I was halfway through packing a suitcase when the dizziness hit. The kind that makes the world tilt sideways and the floor rush up to meet you. The last thing I remember was reaching for the bedpost and missing. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital room, the steady beep of monitors, my only company. My throat felt like sandpaper, and my body seemed disconnected, as if I were floating slightly above it. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. "Mrs. Harrington, you're back with us. Don't try to speak yet. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your family has been notified." 3 days. The words echoed in my foggy brain as the doctor arrived to explain what happened. Apparently, I hadn't just fainted from emotional distress. I'd suffered a brain aneurysm that had been a ticking time bomb, as he put it. The surgery had been successful, but my recovery would be slow. Weeks in the hospital, possibly months of rehabilitation. Your husband was here earlier, the nurse mentioned as she adjusted my fore. He seemed very concerned. Had to leave for a business meeting, but I'm sure he'll be back soon. I closed my eyes, not wanting her to see the bitter smile that threatened to form. A business meeting. Of course. The first week passed in a blur of pain medication, tests, and brief visits from my adult children. James, my oldest, flew in from Chicago where he managed our Midwest operations. The twins, Sarah and Sophie, took turns sitting with me, their worried faces making me feel both loved and guilty for causing such concern. Only my youngest, Nathan, seemed strangely distant, his visits brief and uncomfortable. Richard came daily, always impeccably dressed, always with flowers that grew more elaborate as the days passed. His performances of devotion were flawless, holding my hand before the nurses, kissing my forehead, calling me darling and sweetheart, in that deep voice that had made me fall in love with him all those years ago. But his eyes never quite met mine, and he never stayed longer than 30 minutes. It was during the second week that I overheard the conversation that would change everything. I was supposed to be sleeping, the medication making me drift in and out of consciousness. The door to my private room was partially open, and voices carried from the hallway. She looks terrible, a woman's voice, young, with that particular inflection of someone who has never known real hardship. How much longer do the doctors think she'll be like this? They're not sure. Nathan's voice, unexpectedly cold. The recovery could take months, or she might never fully recover. Brain injuries are unpredictable. Well, your father can't keep putting his life on hold indefinitely. The woman's voice again, impatient now. We had plans, you know. The Maldives in April, then Paris for the summer. Vanessa not here. Nathan sounded nervous. Someone might hear you. Vanessa. So this was her. The executive assistant. The mistress. The woman young enough to be my daughter. Why not here? It's not like she can hear us. And even if she could, what difference would it make now? Your father and I have waited long enough. She's still my mother. A mother who controlled everything and everyone with her perfect lady act. Vanessa's voice dripped with contempt. Your father had to hide who he really was for decades. Don't you want him to be happy? Of course I do. But nothing. Look, Nathan, I know this is difficult, but we need to be practical. Your father is going to need support making decisions. Medical decisions, financial decisions. Someone needs to take control while she's incapacitated. The conversation continued, but their voices moved further down the hallway. I lay there, frozen, as pieces began to fall into place. Nathan's distance. Richard's brief visits. The hushed phone calls he took outside my room. They were planning for my absence. Planning a future that didn't include me. That night, as the hospital quieted and the night shift nurses made their rounds, I found myself more alert than I had been in days. The medication was wearing off, and with it came clarity. I pressed the call button. Mrs. Harrington? Do you need something for pain? The night nurse appeared, her face kind in the dim light. No, I whispered, my voice still weak. I need to make a phone call. She hesitated. It's after hours, and Dr. Weissman wants you resting. Please. I summoned every ounce of the Southern charm that had opened doors for me my entire life. It's important. My family. I need to speak with someone privately. Perhaps it was the desperation in my eyes, or perhaps she was simply one of those nurses who understood that healing involves more than just medicine. Whatever the reason, she brought me a hospital phone and closed the door. With trembling fingers, I dialed a number I knew by heart but hadn't called in years. This is Judge Marcus Kingsley. The voice was gruff with sleep. Marcus, I whispered. It's Eleanor Harrington. A pause. Eleanor? My God, it's 1 a.m. Are you all right? Marcus Kingsley had been a friend since law school, Richard's roommate, in fact. They'd had a falling out 15 years ago over something neither would discuss, and Marcus had disappeared from our lives. What Richard didn't know was that Marcus and I had maintained a cautious friendship, meeting for coffee once a year to catch up. No, I admitted. I'm in Piedmont Hospital. I need your help, and I need absolute discretion." By the time the sun rose over Atlanta, Judge Kingsley had set things in motion. He arrived at the hospital looking distinguished as ever, his silver hair and Brooks Brothers suit a stark contrast to the sterile environment. He brought with him Theodore Walsh, the finest estates attorney in Georgia and, conveniently, someone who owed Marcus a significant favor. "Eleanor, you look like hell," Marcus said, taking the chair beside my bed while Theodore set up his laptop on the rolling table. Always the charmer. I managed a weak smile. "Thank you for coming." When a woman calls you at 1 in the morning after years of Christmas cards and cautious coffee dates, it's either an emergency or a proposition. Given your current state, I assumed the former. Theodore cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harrington, Judge Kingsley has explained the situation. Before we proceed, I need to confirm that you're of sound mind and acting of your own free will." As sound as anyone who just discovered her husband and son are planning her funeral while she's still breathing. The bitterness surprised even me. "Yes, Mr. Walsh. I know exactly what I'm doing." For the next hour, we worked, Theodore typing rapidly as I outlined exactly what I wanted. Marcus occasionally offering legal advice or suggesting language that would be difficult to challenge. My strength was limited, but my mind was clear, perhaps clearer than it had been in years. "Are you certain about this?" Theodore asked when we had finished. "It's unusually specific. I've spent my life building something beautiful," I said, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline. "I won't have it dismantled by people who never appreciated its value." Marcus squeezed my hand. "Richard always underestimated you. That was his first mistake. And his last," I whispered. The next 2 weeks passed with excruciating slowness. My physical therapy began, painful sessions that left me exhausted but determined. The doctors were surprised by my sudden motivation, my insistence on pushing harder, recovering faster. Little did they know that every painful step was fueled by the thought of Richard and Vanessa planning their future with my money, in my homes, wearing jewelry bought with a fortune I had helped build. Richard's visits became even shorter, his excuses more elaborate. Twice, I heard Vanessa's voice in the hallway, though she never entered my room. Nathan stopped coming altogether, while my other children visited faithfully, bringing news from the outside world. "Dad's working too hard," James confided one afternoon. "He's at the office until midnight most days." I made a sympathetic noise, knowing exactly where Richard really was and who he was with. "The downtown project is stalled without you," Sophie added. "The designers keep asking what you want for the model unit and nobody knows." The downtown project, a luxury condominium development that had been my baby for the past 2 years. Interesting that work had stalled without my input, considering Richard had always claimed my design choices were unnecessary expenses. "Tell them to wait," I said. "I'll be back sooner than everyone thinks." Sarah, always the most perceptive of my children, studied my face. "Mom, is everything okay? Besides the obvious, I mean, you seem different." I smiled, reaching for her hand. "Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying things, sweetheart. I'm just seeing some situations more clearly now." It was during the 3rd week that I overheard the conversation that would confirm everything, the one mentioned in the scenario you provided. I was dozing, my afternoon therapy session having drained what little energy I had, when voices from the doorway pulled me back to consciousness. "You need to prepare yourselves," Vanessa's voice, sickly sweet and condescending. "The doctors say she may never fully recover. Your father is devastated, of course, but life must go on." "I don't understand why you're even here," Sophie's voice, tight with anger. "You're his assistant, not family." A light laugh. "Oh, honey, I'm much more than his assistant. I have been for years. Why do you think he's been so happy lately?" "Get out." James, his voice trembling with fury. "Before I call security." "You don't get it, do you?" Vanessa's voice hardened. "Your father and I are together. We have been for a long time. This situation is terrible timing, but in some ways, it's a blessing in disguise. A clean break. A clean break." Sarah sounded incredulous. "That's our mother you're talking about." And she was a wonderful mother, I'm sure. But she's not the same person anymore. She may never be. Forget her. I'll be the one inheriting everything soon. And don't worry, I'll make sure you're all taken care of. The smug certainty in her voice made my blood boil. I wanted to sit up, to scream, to throw something at her perfectly made-up face. But I remained still, my eyes closed, my breathing steady. Information was power, and I needed every advantage. "You disgusting," James began, but Sophie cut him off. "Not here. Not now. Let's go." Their footsteps retreated, and I allowed myself to open my eyes. The room was empty, but I could feel Vanessa's presence lingering like cheap perfume. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, not just at her audacity, but at myself for being so blind for so long. That night, I called Marcus again. "It's time," I said when he answered. "Everything is ready. Theodore filed the paperwork this morning," he confirmed. "Are you sure you're strong enough for this?" "I've never been stronger," I replied, and I meant it. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, they had burned away any weakness, leaving only steel behind. The following day, I asked the doctor for a private conversation. Dr. Weissman was a kind man who had treated our family for years, delivering 2 of my children and seeing us through various illnesses. "Eleanor, your recovery is progressing well," he said, reviewing my chart. "The physical therapy reports are encouraging. When can I go home?" I asked directly. He hesitated. "That's what I wanted to discuss. Your husband has expressed concerns about your ability to manage at home. He's suggested a rehabilitation facility for the next few months." Of course he had. Keep me tucked away, out of sight, while he and Vanessa played house with my life. "I see," I said calmly. "And as my doctor, what's your medical opinion?" "With proper home care, nurses, therapists, you could continue your recovery at home. It would be challenging, but not impossible." "Then that's what I want. I want to go home." Dr. Weissman looked uncomfortable. Richard seemed quite adamant about the facility. "Perhaps you should discuss it with him." "Dr. Weissman," I said, lowering my voice, "I'd like to speak with you as a friend as well as my physician. Can I trust your discretion?" His expression shifted to concern. "Of course, Eleanor." For the next 20 minutes, I shared selected pieces of what I had discovered. Not everything, just enough to make him understand my situation. By the time I finished, his face had darkened with anger. "I had no idea," he said finally. "Richard always seemed so devoted. Appearances can be deceiving. Now, about my release. I'll sign the paperwork today. You can go home tomorrow, with appropriate care, of course." "Thank you." I squeezed his hand. "One more thing. I don't want Richard informed until an hour before I'm discharged. Can you arrange that?" Dr. Weissman's eyes met mine, and I saw understanding dawn. "Consider it done." The next day, at precisely 2 p.m., I was sitting in a wheelchair at the hospital entrance, a private nurse by my side, when James pulled up in his Range Rover. Dr. Weissman had called Richard at 1 p.m. as promised, but apparently, my husband had been unreachable. "How convenient." "Mom, are you sure about this?" James asked as he helped me into the car. "Dad's pretty upset. He says the house isn't ready for you yet." "I'm sure," I said, settling into the seat. "Take me home, James." The drive to Buckhead was quiet, the nurse occasionally checking my vitals while James kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I knew what he was thinking, that I looked frail, that perhaps Richard was right about the rehabilitation facility. But beneath my pale exterior, a fire was burning that would have surprised him. As we turned onto our street, I saw them, Richard and Vanessa, standing on the front steps of my home. Richard pacing anxiously while Vanessa spoke rapidly into her phone. The sight of her there, so comfortable, so entitled, made my resolve harden even further. "Oh hell," James muttered. Dad brought his assistant home. "Is that appropriate right now?" "It's fine," I said, my voice steady. "In fact, it's perfect." The car stopped, and Richard rushed forward, his face a mask of concern as he opened my door. "Eleanor, what are you thinking? You're not ready to be home yet." I've found an excellent facility in Savannah. Hello, Richard. I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. How thoughtful of you to prepare for my homecoming. His eyes darted to Vanessa, who had frozen on the steps, her phone still in hand. Eleanor, you're not thinking clearly. The doctor said. The doctor said I could come home with proper care. I corrected him, gesturing to the nurse. James, would you help me inside, please? I'm rather tired from the journey. As James helped me from the car, I saw the twins' vehicles pull into the driveway, followed by a black town car I recognized as belonging to Theodore Walsh. Right on schedule. What's going on? Richard demanded, his facade of concern slipping. Why are the girls here? And who is that? Family meeting, I said simply. I think it's time we all had a talk, don't you? The look of panic that flashed across his face was almost worth everything I had endured. The next hour was carefully orchestrated chaos. The nurse settled me in the living room while my children gathered, confusion evident on their faces. Richard kept trying to speak with me privately, but I made sure we were never alone. Vanessa hovered at the edges, clearly uncertain of her role in this unexpected scenario. When Theodore Walsh entered, carrying his briefcase, Richard's confusion turned to alarm. Eleanor, why is Ted Walsh here? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. He's an estate's attorney. Is he? I feigned surprise. How fortunate, since we need to discuss some estate matters. Before Richard could respond, Theodore cleared his throat. If everyone could take a seat, Mrs. Harrington has asked me to go over some important legal changes. What legal changes? Richard's voice had an edge now. Eleanor has been in the hospital. She's not in any condition to make legal decisions. Theodore smiled thinly. On the contrary, Mr. Harrington, Dr. Weissman has provided a comprehensive evaluation of Mrs. Harrington's mental capacity. She is perfectly competent to make her own decisions. The room fell silent as everyone took seats, my children on the sofa, Richard in his usual armchair, Vanessa awkwardly perching on an ottoman near the doorway as if ready to flee. 3 weeks ago, Theodore began, Mrs. Harrington contacted me to make some adjustments to various legal documents. These changes were filed yesterday and are now legally binding. Richard leaned forward. What kind of changes? First, Theodore continued as if Richard hadn't spoken. Mrs. Harrington has established a new power of attorney for both financial and medical decisions. Effective immediately, her son James will serve in this capacity. That's ridiculous, Richard snapped. I'm her husband. I have automatic. Not in Georgia, Mr. Harrington, Theodore corrected. A spouse is the presumptive choice, but an individual can designate anyone they choose. Mrs. Harrington has chosen James. James looked stunned. Mom, are you sure? I nodded. I'm sure, sweetheart. Second, Theodore continued, Mrs. Harrington has created a new living trust that now holds the majority of the family assets, including the ownership shares of Harrington Enterprises. Richard stood up. You can't do that. Half of those assets are mine. Actually, Mr. Harrington, an analysis of the asset acquisition timeline indicates that approximately 67% of the current holdings originated from Mrs. Harrington's family investments or were acquired under Georgia's marital property laws. The trust acknowledges your 33% interest, which remains in your name. The color drained from Richard's face as he realized what was happening. This is insane. Eleanor, stop this right now. I met his gaze steadily. Please continue, Mr. Walsh. The trust establishes a board of trustees consisting of Mrs. Harrington, James Harrington, and Judge Marcus Kingsley, who will oversee all major financial decisions related to the family holdings. Marcus Kingsley? Richard's voice rose. You brought that backstabbing. Richard, I interrupted calmly. Please control yourself. The children. He fell silent, years of social conditioning kicking in automatically. Finally, Theodore said, Mrs. Harrington has made changes to her will and end-of-life directives. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even Vanessa had stopped pretending to check her phone. In the event of Mrs. Harrington's death, Her personal assets and her shares in Harrington Enterprises will be divided equally among her 4 children, with the stipulation that all decisions require a 3/4 majority vote for the first 5 years. Richard was shaking now, his hands gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. "You've cut me out completely." "Not completely," I said softly. "You retain your minority share in the company. You keep your personal assets. But yes, Richard, I've ensured that what's mine stays mine." "You can't do this," he said, but the fight was draining from his voice. "I'll contest it." "On what grounds?" Theodore asked mildly. "Mrs. Harrington is mentally competent, as certified by her physician. The assets in question are properly documented, and should you choose to pursue litigation..." He paused, removing another document from his briefcase. "Mrs. Harrington has prepared a detailed affidavit regarding certain indiscretions that would become public record in any contested proceedings." Richard's eyes darted to Vanessa, who had gone very still. "Mom," Sarah broke in, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Why are you doing this?" I looked at my children, seeing the confusion and hurt in their eyes. They deserved the truth, no matter how painful. But before I could speak, Vanessa suddenly stood up. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You can't just change everything because you got sick. Richard and I have plans we've waited years for." She stopped abruptly, realizing what she had just revealed in front of everyone. The room went deadly quiet. "For what, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice gentle but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "For me to die? Or just to become inconvenient enough that you could step into my place without the messiness of a divorce?" Sophie gasped. Sarah covered her mouth. James stood up, his face contorted with fury as he turned to his father. "Is this true?" he demanded. "You and her?" Richard looked trapped, his eyes darting between his children, Vanessa and me. "It's complicated," he finally said. "Your mother and I, we haven't really been. It hasn't been a real marriage for years." "That's news to me," I said calmly. "And apparently to our children as well." Nathan, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke. "Dad told me you knew, that you had an arrangement." I turned to my youngest, seeing the confusion in his eyes. "There was never any arrangement, Nathan. Only betrayal." "She's lying," Vanessa interjected desperately. "Richard told me you knew, that you didn't care as long as he was discreet, that you were cold in the bedroom for years." The crude words hung in the air like poison. I saw my daughters flinch, saw James take a step toward Vanessa before thinking better of it. "I think," I said, rising slowly from my seat with the nurse's assistance, "that this meeting is concluded. Mr. Walsh has explained the legal changes. My children are now aware of the situation. And Richard." I looked at the man I had loved for over 3 decades, the father of my children, the partner in all my dreams. "Richard knows exactly where he stands." "Eleanor, please," Richard started, but I held up my hand. "I'm quite tired," I said. "The nurse will help me upstairs. I'd like to rest in my bedroom alone. James, would you make sure the guest room is prepared for your father?" "The guest room?" Richard repeated incredulously. "This is my house, too." "Yes," I agreed. "And you're welcome to stay in it, in the guest room. Unless you'd prefer to stay at that downtown apartment you've been keeping. The one on Peachtree? I believe the lease runs through December." His face showed shock that I knew about the apartment, followed quickly by calculation. I could almost see him thinking that if I knew about the apartment, what else did I know? "Vanessa," I continued, turning to the younger woman, "it's time for you to leave. You are no longer employed by Harrington Enterprises, effective immediately. James, as the new Chief Operations Officer, will have HR prepare your final paycheck." "You can't fire me," she sputtered. "Richard is the CEO." "Yes, he is," I agreed. "Of a company that is now 67% controlled by my trust. The Board of Trustees has made its first decision. You're terminated." The look of pure hatred she gave me would have frightened me 3 weeks ago. Now it felt almost satisfying. "This isn't over," she hissed, grabbing her purse. "Richard, are you going to just stand there?" Richard looked between us, clearly calculating his options. I could see the moment he decided to retreat and regroup. It was a look I'd seen many times over our marriage when he was outmaneuvered in business. "Go home, Vanessa," he said quietly. "We'll talk later." Her face crumpled in disbelief. "You're choosing her? After everything?" "He's choosing the path of least resistance," I corrected her. "It's what Richard does. Today, that means appearing to accept my terms while he figures out his next move." I turned to my husband. "Isn't that right, dear?" The flash of anger in his eyes confirmed I was right. Vanessa looked between us, then stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the crystal chandelier in the foyer tingled. "Mom," Sophie said in the silence that followed, "how long have you known?" I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years. "Known definitely? Since the hospital. Suspected? For longer than I care to admit." "Why didn't you say something?" Sarah asked. "Because," I said, looking at each of my children, "I wanted to believe the life we built was real. I wanted to protect you from this ugliness. And perhaps, most of all, I didn't want to be that woman, the one whose husband trades her in for a newer model." "You're nothing like that," James said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know." Richard cleared his throat. "If you're quite finished destroying my character, I'd like to speak with my wife. Alone." "No," I said simply. "I have nothing to say to you that can't be said in front of our children. You've made your choices, Richard. Now you can live with the consequences." "This is absurd," he snapped, his cool facade finally cracking. "You think you can just take control of everything? That you can humiliate me like this, and I'll just accept it?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you have two options. You can fight me, contest the legal changes, drag us all through a public and messy battle that will destroy what's left of your reputation and potentially expose certain financial irregularities I've discovered in the company books. Or you can accept these terms, maintain your position as CEO under the board's oversight, and we can present a united public front while privately living separate lives." His eyes narrowed. "Financial irregularities. Did you think I wouldn't notice the money being funneled through the Cayman accounts? Or the property purchases under subsidiary names? I built this company with you, Richard. I know where all the bodies are buried." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Good. Mom needs to rest," James said firmly, stepping between us. "Dad, I think you should take some time to process all this. The guest room will be ready in an hour." As the nurse helped me toward the stairs, I heard Richard say quietly to James, "She won't get away with this. She's still weak. She'll make a mistake." I paused, turning back to look at him one last time. "Oh, Richard," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've already survived the worst you could do to me. There's nothing left for me to fear." As I climbed the stairs to the bedroom we had shared for decades, I felt a strange sense of peace beneath the exhaustion. The battle wasn't over. I knew Richard too well to believe he would surrender so easily. Vanessa certainly wouldn't disappear quietly. And my children were still processing the shattered image of their perfect family. But for the first time in years, perhaps decades, I was standing in my truth. No more pretending. No more looking away from what was right in front of me. No more sacrificing my dignity for the sake of appearances. That night, alone in my bed, I thought about the woman I had been just a month ago, carefully maintaining a life built on illusions, desperately clinging to a marriage that existed only in my mind. That woman seemed like a stranger now, or perhaps a cocoon that had finally split open, revealing something unexpected inside. As I drifted off to sleep, my phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be one of my children checking on me. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. The message was simple. "You have no idea what you've started. Sweet dreams, Eleanor." I set the phone down without replying. Let Vanessa make her threats. Let Richard plot his counterattack. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles. But tonight, for the first time in years, I would sleep without lies between me and my pillow. Morning came with the soft Georgia sunshine filtering through my bedroom curtains. For a moment, just a brief heartbeat, I forgot everything. The hospital, Richard's betrayal, Vanessa's threats. Then reality rushed back like a tide, and I opened my eyes to my new life. The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs, leaning heavily on the railing. My body was still weak, but my resolve had never been stronger. In the kitchen, I found James at the table, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. "You're up early," I said, making my way to the coffee pot. He jumped up to help me. "Mom, sit down. I'll get that." I'm not an invalid, James. But I let him pour me a cup anyway, the rich aroma filling my senses. "Where's your father?" James's jaw tightened. "He left around midnight. Took a suitcase. Didn't say where he was going." I nodded, unsurprised. Richard had never been one to face unpleasant situations head-on. He preferred to retreat, regroup, and return when he had the upper hand. I'd seen this strategy countless times in business negotiations. "The girls went home, but they'll be back later," James continued. "Nathan." He hesitated. "Nathan went with Dad." That stung more than I wanted to admit. My youngest had always been Richard's shadow, eager for his approval. Learning that Nathan had known about the affair, perhaps even facilitated it, was a wound that would take time to heal. "He's confused," I said, trying to believe it myself. "Your father has always had a way of making his version of reality seem like the only truth." James set his cup down with more force than necessary. "That doesn't excuse it. None of this does." I reached across the table to take his hand. "No one's asking you to excuse anything. But Nathan is your brother, and he's going to need us when he realizes what your father is really doing." The doorbell rang, interrupting our moment. James frowned. "It's not even 7 a.m. Would you mind?" I asked, gesturing to my robe and disheveled appearance. He nodded and disappeared toward the foyer. I heard the door open, followed by raised voices. James is angry. Another man's insistent. Then footsteps approaching the kitchen. "Mom," James said, his face tight with anger. "It's a process server. For you." Behind him stood a young man in a cheap suit, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Eleanor Harrington?" he asked, refusing to meet my eyes. "Yes," I said, straightening in my chair. He thrust an envelope toward me. "You've been served." I took the envelope calmly, noting the familiar letterhead of Prescott and Wainwright, Richard's longtime friends and attorneys. So, he'd wasted no time. "Thank you," I said politely. The server looked surprised at my composure, then hurried out as if the house might collapse around him. "That son of a—" James began. "Language," I admonished automatically, though my heart wasn't in it. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents inside, a bitter smile forming on my lips. "What is it?" James asked, hovering over my shoulder. "Your father is seeking an emergency hearing to invalidate yesterday's legal changes. He's claiming I'm mentally incompetent due to my medical condition." I set the papers down. "He's also seeking a temporary restraining order to freeze the family assets." James slammed his fist on the counter. "After everything he's done, he has the nerve to." "Of course he does," I interrupted calmly. "This is Richard we're talking about. He was never going to surrender without a fight." I reached for my phone. "Call your sisters. Then get Theodore on the line. We need to prepare our response." As James made the calls, I sipped my coffee and considered my next move. Richard was predictable in his unpredictability, always choosing the path others wouldn't expect. But after 35 years of marriage, I knew his playbook better than he realized. By noon, our kitchen had transformed into a war room. Theodore Walsh sat at the head of the table, legal documents spread before him. Marcus Kingsley had joined us, his judicial experience proving invaluable. Sophie and Sarah sat together on one side, their faces still bearing the shock of yesterday's revelations. "The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning," Theodore explained. "Judge Patterson will preside." "Patterson." Marcus frowned. "He golfs with Richard every Sunday." "Precisely why Richard's attorneys requested him," Theodore agreed. "However, I've already filed a motion for recusal based on conflict of interest." I nodded, impressed by his foresight. "What about the TRO on the assets?" "That's more concerning," Theodore admitted. Until the competency issue is resolved, the court might freeze everything as a precautionary measure. We need to move quickly then, I said. James, call the bank. Transfer the operating funds for the Midtown project to the contingency account. Is that legal? Sarah asked, worry creasing her brow. Completely, Marcus assured her. Those funds were already designated for that project. We're simply securing them for their intended purpose. As the day progressed, the true scope of Richard's strategy became clear. He wasn't just attacking the new trust. He was making a play for everything, including full control of Harrington Enterprises. The legal documents revealed his claim that the company had always been his creation, with my role minimized to supportive spouse. The irony was almost laughable. I had been the one to secure the financing for our first development project when no bank would take a chance on Richard. My family connections had opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to him alone. My design sense had transformed his utilitarian buildings into spaces people actually wanted to live and work in. Yet in his version of our history, I was little more than a decorative accessory. He's overplaying his hand, Marcus observed as we reviewed the filings. No one who knows you would believe this characterization. But Judge Patterson doesn't know me, I pointed out. He knows Richard, the Richard who tells charming stories over golf and picks up the tab at the club. The doorbell rang again, and we all tensed. These days, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. I'll get it, Sophie offered, returning moments later with a confused expression. Mom, it's Diane Colby from the hospital board. And a bunch of other women? I made my way to the foyer, where Diane stood with 5 other women, all members of Atlanta's social elite, all wives of Richard's business associates or golfing buddies. Eleanor, darling, Diane exclaimed, kissing the air beside my cheek. We heard you were home and simply had to come see how you're doing. The sympathy in her eyes was genuine, but there was something else there too. Curiosity, perhaps even excitement. Nothing entertained the Buckhead crowd more than a scandal, especially one involving one of their own. How thoughtful, I said, leading them to the living room. I'm improving daily. For the next 30 minutes, I endured their careful questions and not-so-subtle probing. They knew something was happening. The rumor mill in our circle worked with terrifying efficiency, but they didn't know exactly what. Richard hasn't been at the club for days, Diane mentioned casually. Stanley was concerned. He's been busy, I replied with a serene smile. Work demands, you understand. Of course, she nodded, not believing me for a second. And that lovely assistant of his, Vanessa, isn't it? I saw her at Phipps Plaza yesterday, absolutely loaded down with shopping bags. Neiman Marcus, Tiffany's. Quite the spree for an assistant salary. The message was clear, they knew. Perhaps not the details, but enough. How interesting, I said, maintaining my composure. I'm afraid I've been a bit out of touch during my recovery. After they left, promising to check in soon, I collapsed onto the sofa, suddenly exhausted. That was Diane's way of choosing sides. I explained to my confused children. She's letting me know that they've seen Vanessa spending money that isn't hers, and they're watching to see how I respond. Why does it matter what those old gossips think? James asked. Because in our world, reputation is currency, I said simply. And your father just lost some of his. That evening, as we finalized our legal strategy, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Can we talk? Alone. I showed the message to James, who frowned. It could be a trap. Dad could be using him to get information. Or he could be my son, reaching out because he's confused, I countered. I'll meet him somewhere public. Despite protests from everyone, I arranged to meet Nathan at the Atlanta Botanical Garden the next morning, before the court hearing. It had always been our special place. I had taken him there every Sunday when he was little, teaching him the names of plants, sharing my love of growing things. That night, I slept fitfully, dreams filled with courtrooms where Richard and Vanessa sat as judges, pronouncing me incompetent while my children were led away. I woke before dawn, my heart racing, the echo of their mocking laughter still ringing in my ears. The morning was cool and misty as James drove me to the botanical garden. He insisted on coming, though I made him promise to wait in the cafe while Nathan and I talked. "If you're not back in 30 minutes, I'm coming to find you," he said stubbornly. I found Nathan waiting by the Japanese garden, hands stuffed in his pockets, looking younger than his 26 years. When he saw me, his face crumpled with emotion. "Mom," he whispered, and then he was in my arms, his shoulders shaking. We sat on a bench surrounded by carefully pruned bonsai trees, the gentle sound of the water feature nearby providing privacy for our conversation. "I didn't know," Nathan began, his voice hoarse. "I mean, I knew Dad had been seeing someone, but he told me you had an arrangement, that you knew and didn't care as long as he was discreet. And you believed him?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "You were always so perfect, so controlled. I thought maybe you just didn't need him the way he needed." He trailed off, embarrassed. The way he needed a younger woman? I finished for him. "Nathan, marriage isn't about needing, excitement, or novelty. It's about commitment, respect, honesty." "I know that now," he said miserably. "When you got sick, when I heard Vanessa talking about inheriting everything, it was like a veil lifted. I saw what was really happening." I took his hand. "Where is your father now?" "At the downtown apartment. With her." His disgust was evident. "He's been on the phone nonstop with the lawyers. He's convinced he can get the judge to rule in his favor." "Is that why you wanted to meet? To warn me?" Nathan looked away.
"Partly. But also because..."
He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "You need to see this." "What is it?" I asked, taking the small device. "Financial records. From Dad's private server." Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "He's been moving money offshore for years."
Millions, Mom.
And not just his money, company funds, client investments. My blood ran cold. I had suspected financial impropriety, but not at this scale. "How did you get this?" "I'm the IT director, remember? Dad never thought I'd look at his personal files." Nathan's expression hardened. "But when I realized what he and Vanessa were planning for you, I started digging." I closed my fingers around the USB drive, its small weight suddenly feeling enormous. "Nathan, this could destroy him." "I know." My youngest son met my gaze directly. "That's why I'm giving it to you. It's your decision what to do with it." As we walked back to where James was waiting, Nathan asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you hate me for believing him?" I stopped, turning to face my son fully. "Nathan, listen to me. I could never hate you. You're my child. Your father manipulated you, just as he manipulated me for years. The difference is that you saw the truth when it mattered." His eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "I know," I said, pulling him close once more. "So am I." James was surprised but cautiously pleased to see Nathan's change of heart. As we drove to the courthouse, I held the USB drive tightly, weighing my options. Using it would almost certainly lead to criminal charges against Richard. It would protect the company and our family assets, but at what cost to my children? The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters. Someone had tipped off the media that one of Atlanta's power couples was headed for a spectacular legal showdown. I held my head high as James and Nathan flanked me, creating a protective barrier. "Mrs. Harrington, is it true your husband is seeking a conservatorship?" "Eleanor, did you really cut Richard out of the will while hospitalized?" "Mrs. Harrington, over here, is there any truth to the rumors about your husband's assistant?" The questions flew like arrows, each one designed to draw blood. I kept walking, my face a mask of dignified composure, a skill perfected over decades of being Richard Harrington's wife. In the courthouse lobby, Theodore and Marcus were waiting, both looking grimly determined. Sophie and Sarah arrived moments later, completing our family phalanx. "Nathan," Theodore said, surprise evident in his voice. "I wasn't expecting you to be here." "I'm where I should have been from the start," Nathan replied, standing straighter. "With my mother." Theodore raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more as he led us toward the courtroom. Just before we entered, I pulled him aside and pressed the USB drive into his hand. "Financial records," I whispered. "Richard has been embezzling company funds." I need you to have someone look at these immediately." His eyes widened, but he nodded, slipping the drive into his pocket without comment. The courtroom was already crowded when we entered. Richard sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 attorneys from Prescott and Wainwright. He looked immaculate as always, tailored suit, perfectly knotted tie, not a hair out of place. The only signs of strain were the tight lines around his mouth and the slight darkening under his eyes. When he saw Nathan enter with us, his composure slipped momentarily, shock and anger flashing across his face. Nathan met his gaze steadily, then deliberately took a seat beside me at the defendant's table. Judge Patterson entered, and we all rose. He was older than I expected, with wire-rimmed glasses and a stern expression that gave nothing away. After the formalities, Richard's lead attorney, Bradley Prescott, rose to present their case. "Your Honor, we come before you today with grave concerns for Mrs. Eleanor Harrington's welfare and mental capacity," he began smoothly. "Following a life-threatening aneurysm and brain surgery just weeks ago, Mrs. Harrington has made a series of irrational and destructive financial decisions that threaten not only her own security, but the stability of Harrington Enterprises and its 300 employees." He went on to paint a picture of me as a confused, vindictive woman, manipulated by opportunistic attorneys during a period of medical vulnerability. According to Prescott, Richard was the devoted husband, desperately trying to protect me from myself. Mrs. Harrington's medical records, which we've submitted under seal, clearly show cognitive impairment consistent with her condition, Prescott continued. Her doctors recommended extended rehabilitation, which Mr. Harrington arranged, only to have Mrs. Harrington refuse treatment and make these damaging legal changes instead. I kept my expression neutral, though inside I was seething. When Theodore rose for our response, his voice was calm but forceful. "Your Honor, the picture Mr. Prescott has painted is not just inaccurate, it's deliberately misleading," he began. Mrs. Harrington's medical records, also submitted to this court, include a comprehensive cognitive assessment performed by Dr. Alan Weissman, her physician of 20 years, who found her to be completely competent. He turned slightly, gesturing toward me. Mrs. Harrington made these legal changes not out of confusion or manipulation, but out of clarity and self-protection. For the past 3 years, Richard Harrington has been engaged in an extramarital affair with his executive assistant, Vanessa Caldwell. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Richard's jaw clenched visibly. During Mrs. Harrington's hospitalization, Ms. Caldwell was overheard telling the Harrington children that she would soon be inheriting everything and that they should forget their mother. Theodore's voice hardened. Mrs. Harrington, facing this betrayal at her most vulnerable moment, took reasonable steps to protect her interests and her children's inheritance. The arguments continued for another hour, each side presenting affidavits and evidence. Dr. Weissman testified via video conference, firmly asserting my mental competence. Richard's team presented a neurologist who had never met me but offered opinions about typical cognitive deficits following brain surgery. As the morning wore on, I noticed Theodore receive a note from an associate who had slipped into the courtroom. He read it, then passed it to Marcus, whose eyebrows shot up. Something had happened. When Judge Patterson called a brief recess, Theodore turned to me. "The financial records Nathan provided are significant. Our forensic accountant has confirmed multiple instances of fund misappropriation, going back at least 5 years." "How bad?" I asked quietly. "Bad enough for criminal charges," Marcus interjected. "Securities fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this new information. "What are our options?" "We can introduce this evidence now," Theodore said. "It would effectively destroy Richard's credibility and likely end this hearing in your favor." "But," I prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice, "but it would also almost certainly result in Richard's arrest. Once this information is presented in court, we can't control what happens next." I looked across the courtroom to where Richard sat, deep in conversation with his attorneys. The man I had loved. The father of my children. A liar.
A cheat.
Possibly a criminal. "There has to be another way," I said finally. A way that protects what's mine without destroying my children's father. Theodore and Marcus exchanged glances. There might be, Marcus said slowly, but it would require Richard to agree to your terms, completely and irrevocably. When court resumed, Judge Patterson looked impatient. Counselors, I've reviewed the submissions from both sides, and frankly, I'm not seeing clear evidence of incompetence that would justify the extreme measure of invalidating Mrs. Harrington's legal decisions. Richard's attorney began to protest, but the judge held up his hand. However, I am concerned about the speed and scope of these changes, particularly coming so soon after a serious medical event. Before I rule, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Harrington herself. All eyes turned to me as I made my way to the witness stand, painfully aware of my still weakened state. After I was sworn in, Judge Patterson looked at me over his glasses. Mrs. Harrington, in your own words, please explain why you made these legal changes. I took a deep breath, glancing around the courtroom, at my children watching anxiously, at Richard's stony expression, at the reporters scribbling furiously in the back row. Your Honor, 3 weeks ago, I nearly died. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. While recovering in the hospital, I overheard my husband's mistress telling my children to forget about me because she would soon be inheriting everything. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That moment of clarity showed me that the life I thought I had, the partnership I believed in, was a fiction. For 35 years, I have dedicated myself to building a family, a business, and a legacy. I have supported my husband in every endeavor, often at the expense of my own ambitions. I looked directly at Richard now. When I needed that same support, I discovered that my husband had been leading a double life for years. That he and his mistress were simply waiting for the right moment to claim what I had helped build. Judge Patterson's expression remained neutral. And the legal changes you made, you understand their implications fully? I do, Your Honor. I did not disinherit my husband or strip him of his rightful assets. I simply protected what was already mine and ensured that our children's inheritance would be secure, regardless of who Richard chooses to share his life with going forward. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. He turned to Richard's attorney. Your cross-examination, Mr. Prescott. Bradley Prescott approached the stand with the confidence of a man who believed he held the winning hand. Mrs. Harrington, isn't it true that since your surgery, you've experienced moments of confusion and memory loss? I've experienced the normal effects of major surgery and medication, I replied calmly. Nothing that has impaired my decision-making abilities. Yet you made these sweeping legal changes without consulting your husband of 35 years? I made them without consulting the man who was planning my replacement while I lay in a hospital bed. I corrected him. Yes. Prescott changed tactics. Mrs. Harrington, throughout your marriage, who primarily handled the family finances? We both did, I answered. Richard managed the business operations, while I oversaw our personal investments and real estate portfolio. And who made the major business decisions for Harrington Enterprises? We did, together. Every significant decision was discussed between us. Prescott smiled, thinking he had me. Then, isn't this unilateral restructuring of family assets contrary to that very pattern of joint decision-making you claim characterized your marriage? I met his gaze steadily. What was contrary to our marriage was my husband's decision to begin a relationship with another woman without my knowledge or consent. What was contrary to our marriage was his assistant announcing to my children that she would be inheriting my life's work. Before Prescott could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and a commotion erupted in the back. All heads turned to see Vanessa Caldwell striding down the center aisle, dressed as if for a fashion shoot rather than a court proceeding. Your Honor. One of Richard's other attorneys jumped up, clearly alarmed. This witness wasn't scheduled to appear today. Judge Patterson frowned. Who is this person? Vanessa Caldwell, Your Honor, Theodore answered quickly. Mr. Harrington's executive assistant, and the woman Mrs. Harrington just referenced in her testimony. Vanessa had reached the front now, her eyes locked on Richard with a mixture of fury and desperation. Tell them, Richard, she demanded loudly. Tell them about our plans, about the promises you made me. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Richard's face had gone completely white. "Miss Caldwell," Judge Patterson's voice cut through the chaos. "This is my courtroom, and you will observe proper decorum or be removed. Is that clear?" Vanessa seemed to suddenly realize where she was and what she was doing. She straightened, smoothing her designer dress. "I apologize, Your Honor. I was told this hearing concerned me and my future, but no one informed me when it was happening." "This hearing concerns Mrs. Harrington's mental competence," the judge corrected her. "Unless you're a medical professional with relevant testimony, I don't see why you're here." "I'm here because Richard promised me," she began, but Prescott was already on his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular and prejudicial. Ms. Caldwell is not a party to these proceedings." "On the contrary," Theodore interjected smoothly. "Ms. Caldwell's relationship with Mr. Harrington and her statements about inheriting everything are central to understanding Mrs. Harrington's actions. We would welcome her sworn testimony." Judge Patterson considered for a moment, then nodded. "Ms. Caldwell, if you have relevant testimony, I'll allow it. But first, Mrs. Harrington needs to complete her testimony. Please take a seat." Vanessa looked like she might protest, but a bailiff moved toward her and she relented, taking a seat in the front row directly behind Richard, who studiously avoided looking at her. Prescott, clearly rattled by the interruption, tried to regain his momentum. "Mrs. Harrington," returning to the matter at hand. But I interrupted him. "Your Honor, if I may, I have a proposal that might resolve this matter without further proceedings." Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Go ahead." I looked directly at Richard. "I am willing to modify the trust to include provisions for Richard that acknowledge his contributions to our shared enterprise on 3 conditions." The courtroom fell silent, waiting. First, Richard must resign as CEO of Harrington Enterprises to be succeeded by our son James, with Richard transitioning to Chairman Emeritus, a title with prestige but limited operational authority. Richard's jaw tightened, but he gave no other reaction. Second, our personal assets will remain divided as currently structured in the trust, with Richard retaining his 33% share of the company and his personal property. I paused, gathering strength for the final condition. Third, Richard will end all personal and professional relationships with Vanessa Caldwell, effective immediately. Vanessa gasped audibly. Richard finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "In return," I continued, "I will withdraw the financial audit currently being conducted on certain irregular transactions identified in the company records." The implication was clear, and I saw the moment Richard understood exactly what I knew and what it meant. The color drained from his face. "Your Honor," Theodore added, "we have prepared a settlement agreement that outlines these terms in detail. If Mr. Harrington accepts, we can resolve this matter today." Judge Patterson looked between us. "Mr. Harrington, are you willing to consider this proposal?" All eyes turned to Richard. He sat frozen for a long moment, then leaned over to confer with his attorneys. The whispered conversation grew heated, with Prescott shaking his head emphatically, while Richard grew increasingly agitated. Finally, Richard stood. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess to review the proposed settlement." "Granted," Judge Patterson said. "We'll reconvene in 30 minutes." As we filed out of the courtroom, I could hear Vanessa's voice rising in the background, demanding to know what was happening. Richard ignored her, heading straight for the conference room with his legal team. In the hallway, Theodore pulled me aside. "That was risky," he said quietly. "If Richard calls your bluff." "It's not a bluff," I replied. "Nathan's USB drive contains enough evidence to send Richard to prison. He knows that now." Theodore nodded slowly. "And if he accepts your terms? You're willing to let the financial irregularities go unexplored." I thought about my children, about the scandal that would erupt if their father faced criminal charges, about the company employees whose livelihoods might be affected. "Some prices are too high," I said finally, "even for justice." 30 minutes later, we reassembled in the courtroom. Richard entered with his attorneys, his face set in grim lines. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. "Mr. Harrington," Judge Patterson began, Have you reached a decision regarding Mrs. Harrington's proposal? Richard stood, buttoning his jacket, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times before important announcements. I have, Your Honor. I accept the terms of the settlement agreement. A collective murmur ran through the courtroom. My children exchanged stunned glances. Very well, Judge Patterson said. The attorneys will finalize the document and will reconvene for the formal signing. In light of this development, Mr. Harrington's petition regarding Mrs. Harrington's competence is dismissed. As the judge rose, signaling the end of the session, Richard turned to look at me directly for the first time that day. His expression held a complex mixture of emotions: anger, respect, perhaps even a hint of the admiration that had once been part of our relationship. For my part, I felt nothing but a profound weariness, coupled with the first tentative stirrings of relief. The battle wasn't over. I knew Richard too well to believe he would surrender completely, but I had won this round decisively. Outside the courthouse, the media had swelled in numbers, alerted by someone that something significant was happening with the Harrington family. As we emerged, cameras flashed and questions were shouted. Mrs. Harrington, what happened in court today? Richard, is it true you're stepping down as CEO? Is Harrington Enterprises in financial trouble? Theodore stepped forward, raising his hands for silence. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington have reached a private agreement regarding family matters. There will be no further comment at this time. As we moved toward our waiting cars, a commotion erupted to our left. Vanessa had emerged from the courthouse and was striding directly toward us, her face contorted with fury. You coward, she screamed at Richard. After everything I did for you, all the promises you made. Richard quickened his pace, trying to reach his car before she could create more of a scene, but Vanessa was faster. She caught up to him on the courthouse steps, grabbing his arm and spinning him around. 3 years, Richard. 3 years of my life, waiting for you to keep your word. You said she meant nothing to you. You said once she was gone, we would have everything. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing frantically, capturing every moment of the spectacle. Richard tried to pull away, his face a mask of controlled panic. Vanessa, not here. This isn't the place. Then where, Richard?
When?
After you abandoned me to save your own skin? She laughed, a high, brittle sound that raised the hairs on the back of my neck. Do they know about the money? About the accounts in the Caymans? About how you were going to take it all and leave the country with me? Richard went completely still. You're upset. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, Vanessa hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. I've seen the papers. I've heard the phone calls. I know about Geneva, about the house you bought there. Our house, Richard. The one you promised we'd live in together after your wife was out of the picture. The media were in a feeding frenzy now, shouting questions, pushing closer. I felt James's arm around my shoulders, steering me away from the unfolding disaster. Mom, we need to go, he urged. This is going to get worse. But I couldn't move, transfixed by the public implosion of my husband's secret life. There was no satisfaction in it, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, for what had never really existed at all. Vanessa was crying now, mascara streaking down her face. You told me you loved me. You told me we would be together. I never said, Richard began, but she cut him off with a sharp laugh. You never said? What about this? She thrust her left hand forward, and something glinted in the sunlight, a diamond ring on her finger. What about the ring you gave me last month? The one you said was a promise of our future. The flash of diamond caught the cameras, and I heard gasps from nearby reporters. The ring was unmistakable, my mother's 3-carat emerald-cut diamond, reset in a modern platinum setting. The ring that Richard had told me was being cleaned when I'd asked about it months ago. Something inside me went very cold. That ring was a family heirloom, passed down through generations of my mother's family. It wasn't Richard's to give away, it was meant for one of our daughters when the time came. Before I could process this new betrayal, Vanessa's tirade reached its crescendo. You're throwing me away to save yourself. After I helped you hide money from her, after I lied for you, covered for you, after I waited in that hospital for her to die. Her words hung in the air like poison. Richard's face had gone ashen. Even the reporters had fallen momentarily silent, stunned by the raw hatred in her voice. And then, security guards from the courthouse were there, surrounding Vanessa, gently but firmly escorting her away as she continued to scream accusations. Richard stood frozen for a moment longer, then bolted for his car, ignoring the shouted questions that followed him. In the sudden quiet that followed their departure, I felt all eyes turn to me, the abandoned wife, the woman who had nearly died while her husband plotted with his mistress. The perfect victim for their next headline. But I was no victim. Not anymore. With my children forming a protective circle around me, I walked steadily down the courthouse steps toward our waiting car. I held my head high, my face composed, giving them nothing, no tears, no anger, no vulnerability to exploit. As James helped me into the back seat, a reporter thrust a microphone toward me. "Mrs. Harrington, how does it feel to hear your husband's mistress say those things?" I paused, one foot in the car, and turned to face the cameras. For a moment, I considered ignoring the question, taking the high road as I had been taught to do my entire life. Instead, I smiled, a small, composed smile that revealed nothing of the storm inside me. "It feels like confirmation that I made the right decision. Now, if you'll excuse me, my family and I have a company to run." The car door closed on their shouted follow-up questions, and we pulled away from the courthouse, leaving the media frenzy behind. In the privacy of the back seat, I finally allowed myself to tremble, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving my body in waves. "Mom, are you all right?" Sophie asked, her face creased with concern as she took my trembling hands in hers. "I will be," I said, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. "It's just seeing the ring." "My mother's ring." Sarah's eyes widened. "That was grandmother's ring? The one you always said would go to one of us when we got engaged." I nodded, a fresh wave of betrayal washing over me. "He told me it was at the jeweler's being cleaned. That was 6 months ago. I should have known then." "You couldn't have known," James said firmly from the front seat. "Dad's been lying to all of us for years." Nathan, who had been silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "I want to go to the office." We all turned to look at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. "The office?" I echoed. "Nathan, after everything that just happened." "Exactly," he interrupted, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Richard in his younger days. "Dad just agreed to step down as CEO. The company will be in chaos. Someone needs to secure the systems, the files, before he has a chance to do any more damage." James nodded slowly. "He's right. Dad still has access to everything. We need to change the security protocols immediately. And I need to address the staff," I added, making a decision. "They deserve to hear from the family directly, not from gossip or news reports." The car changed direction, heading toward the gleaming Harrington Enterprises headquarters in Midtown. As we drove, my phone began buzzing incessantly, friends, board members, business associates, all calling to find out what was happening. I ignored them all, focusing instead on what needed to be done next. By the time we arrived at the office, the story had already broken on local news. Employees stopped and stared as we walked through the lobby, whispering behind their hands. I held my head high, acknowledging them with nods but offering no explanations. In the executive suite, Richard's longtime secretary, Margaret, looked up in surprise as we entered. Her eyes were red, and a tissue was clutched in her hand. The television on her desk was tuned to a local station showing footage of Vanessa's courthouse meltdown. "Mrs. Harrington," she stammered, rising quickly. We didn't expect you. Mr. Harrington hasn't come in yet." "And he won't be coming in, Margaret," I said gently. "There are going to be some changes. Could you please call an all-staff meeting in the main conference room in 30 minutes? Her eyes widened, but years of professional discretion kept her from asking questions. "Of course, Mrs. Harrington. Right away." As Margaret left to make the arrangements, we gathered in Richard's corner office, the symbol of his power and status for over 2 decades. The space was immaculate as always. Richard had never tolerated disorder. A large portrait of the two of us hung on one wall, taken on our 30th anniversary. We looked happy, my hand resting on his shoulder, his arm around my waist. A perfect couple. A perfect lie. "We need to move quickly," Nathan said, sitting down at Richard's computer. "Dad's admin access needs to be revoked immediately." "Is that legal?" Sarah asked. "The settlement isn't finalized yet. The court accepted his verbal agreement," I reminded her. "And as trustees of the family holdings, James, Judge Kingsley, and I have the authority to make these changes." While Nathan worked on the computer systems, James made calls to key executives, preparing them for the announcement. Sophie and Sarah helped me draft a statement for the employees and another for the press. By the time we entered the main conference room 30 minutes later, it was packed with nervous-looking staff. The room fell silent as I walked to the front, my children arrayed behind me like a protective wall. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "I know there have been rumors and news reports circulating today about the Harrington family and this company. I'm here to give you the facts directly." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. People who had worked with us for years, whose livelihoods depended on the stability of Harrington Enterprises. Effective immediately, Richard Harrington is stepping down as CEO of Harrington Enterprises. James Harrington will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, with the full support of the Board of Trustees and the family. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. I raised my hand for silence. This transition is part of a planned succession that has been accelerated due to personal circumstances. The company remains financially strong and operationally sound. All projects will continue as scheduled, and no staff changes are anticipated. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough for now. The employees didn't need to know about Richard's financial manipulations or his personal betrayals. I know this news comes as a shock to many of you who have worked with Richard for years. Change is never easy. But Harrington Enterprises has always been a family company, and it will remain so. My children and I are committed to its continued success, and to each of you who helped make that success possible. As I opened the floor for questions, I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the unspoken concerns about job security and company stability. I answered each question calmly and directly, projecting a confidence I didn't entirely feel. When the meeting concluded, James stepped forward to make his first address as CEO, outlining his vision for the company's future. I watched with pride as my oldest son, so like me in his methodical approach to problems, reassured the staff with his steady presence. By late afternoon, we had completed the most urgent tasks. Security protocols had been updated, key clients had been contacted, and a press release had been issued. I was exhausted, the adrenaline that had carried me through the day finally wearing off. "Mom, you need to rest," Sophie insisted, noticing my pallor. "You're still recovering. Let us handle the rest." I didn't have the energy to argue. As we prepared to leave, Margaret appeared at the door of the conference room where we had set up our temporary command center. "Mrs. Harrington," she said hesitantly, "there's something you should know." The tone of her voice made us all look up. Margaret had been with the company for 25 years, starting as Richard's assistant when we were just beginning to build our empire. "What is it, Margaret?" I asked. She twisted her hands nervously. "It's about Miss Caldwell. When she first started working here 3 years ago, Mr. Harrington had me set up a special account for her. A consulting fee, he called it, $20,000 a month, paid through a shell company." James let out a low whistle. "That's nearly $250,000 a year." "There's more," Margaret continued, her voice dropping. "Last year, he had me prepare paperwork transferring ownership of the Buckhead Heights property to her name." I felt like I'd been struck. The Buckhead Heights property was a luxury condominium development we had completed 2 years ago. Richard had insisted on keeping one of the penthouse units as a company asset for entertaining clients. "The penthouse," I clarified, though I already knew the answer. Margaret nodded miserably. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Harrington. I should have said something sooner, but Mr. Harrington was very clear that these were confidential business matters." "You're telling us now," I said gently. That's what matters. After Margaret left, we sat in stunned silence for a moment. The audacity, Sarah finally said, shaking her head. Using company money to fund his affair. Setting her up in a multi-million-dollar property. The question is, James said, his business mind already calculating, how many other financial irregularities are we going to find once we start looking? And what do we do about them? Sophie added. I sighed, feeling the weight of each new revelation. For now, we secure what we can and assess the damage. James, I want a full financial audit of the company, conducted quietly. Nathan, keep working on the digital records. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. As we finally left the office that evening, the sky was darkening with storm clouds, a fitting end to a tumultuous day. James insisted on driving me home, concerned about my still fragile health. You should stay at my place tonight, he suggested as we pulled away from the building. The media is probably camped out of the house by now. He was right, of course. The scandal was too juicy for the press to ignore. Atlanta's real estate power couple imploding in public, complete with a dramatic mistress meltdown on the courthouse steps. No, I said firmly. I won't be chased from my own home. Besides, I need to face it sometime. Sure enough, as we approached the house, we could see news vans parked along the street and reporters standing in clusters on the sidewalk. They surged forward as our car slowed, cameras flashing through the windows. Ready? James asked, his hand on the gear shift. I nodded, straightening my shoulders and checking my reflection in the visor mirror. I might feel broken inside, but I would be damned if I let them see it. James pulled into the driveway, the electronic gate closing behind us to block the pursuing reporters. The house looked exactly as we had left it that morning, its stately facade revealing nothing of the drama that had unfolded in the hours since. Inside, I paused in the foyer, struck by the sudden realization that this was no longer our home, Richard's and mine. It was just mine now. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. I'll stay tonight, James said, reading my expression. The girls said they'd come by in the morning. I squeezed his hand gratefully. Thank you. After a light dinner that neither of us had much appetite for, I excused myself to take a bath, needing the solitude to process the day's events. The master bathroom had always been my sanctuary, a marble and glass retreat with a soaking tub overlooking the garden. I sank into the hot water with a sigh, letting the tension begin to ease from my body. It was there, surrounded by steam and the scent of lavender bath oil, that I finally allowed the tears to come. Not for Richard. I was beyond mourning our marriage, but for the life I had believed in, for the years spent building something that had been undermined from within, for the humiliation of discovering such betrayal so publicly. I cried until I had no tears left, then lay back in the cooling water, staring at the ceiling. When I finally emerged, wrapped in my robe, I felt oddly cleansed, as if the tears had washed away not just my grief, but the last vestiges of the woman I had been, the trusting wife, the willing partner, the keeper of a perfect facade. In the bedroom, I avoided looking at Richard's side of the closet, at the empty spaces where he had hastily grabbed clothes the night before. Instead, I opened my jewelry box, instinctively reaching for the comfort of familiar treasures, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the sapphire pendant James had given me for my 50th birthday, the charm bracelet that held symbols of each of my children. But something was wrong. The box felt too empty, the velvet compartments too bare. With growing alarm, I began a systematic inventory. My diamond tennis bracelet gone. The ruby earrings Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary missing. The Cartier watch that had been a gift from my father, nowhere to be found. With shaking hands, I moved to the safe hidden behind a painting on the wall. The combination hadn't been changed, a small mercy. Inside, the documents were untouched, but the small velvet pouches that had contained my most valuable pieces were empty. My emerald suite, my grandmother's diamond brooch, the platinum and diamond necklace I had worn to Sophie's wedding. All gone. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. Richard hadn't just given Vanessa my mother's ring. He had been systematically looting my personal jewelry collection, likely for months. The next morning, after a fitful night's sleep, I called Theodore Walsh before the sun was fully up. "I need to modify the settlement," I said without preamble. "Richard has stolen my jewelry, family heirlooms, personal pieces. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth." Theodore was silent for a moment. "That complicates things. The settlement is being drafted as we speak." "I want it all back," I said firmly. "Every piece. And I want a full accounting of any other personal items he may have taken." "I'll add it to the terms," Theodore promised. "But Eleanor, you should know. Richard's attorneys called late last night. They're pushing back on some of the provisions, particularly your demand that he end all contact with Miss Caldwell." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "After her performance yesterday? He's still trying to protect her." "Actually, I think he's trying to protect himself. She knows too much about his financial dealings. If he cuts her off completely, she might expose even more." I finished the thought. "Well, that's his problem, not mine. The terms stand." After hanging up, I made my way downstairs to find James already in the kitchen, making coffee. The morning news was playing on the small television on the counter, and I wasn't surprised to see our family drama as the lead story. "Breaking news in the Harrington saga," the perfectly coiffed anchor was saying. Sources close to Vanessa Caldwell, the mistress of real estate mogul Richard Harrington, claim she has been hospitalized following an apparent overdose last night. I froze, coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Turn it up," I said to James. "Details are still emerging," the anchor continued, "but we understand Miss Caldwell was found unconscious in her Buckhead apartment by a neighbor. Her condition is described as serious but stable." This development comes just hours after a dramatic scene outside the Fulton County Courthouse, where Ms. Caldwell publicly confronted Richard Harrington following a hearing in which he agreed to step down as CEO of Harrington Enterprises. I turned away from the television, a complicated mix of emotions churning inside me. Vanessa Caldwell had tried to steal my life, had waited eagerly for my death, had flaunted her relationship with my husband. I despised her. And yet, the thought of her alone in a hospital bed, having tried to end her life, brought me no satisfaction. "Do you think it was really a suicide attempt?" James asked quietly. "Or a bid for sympathy?" I said, then immediately regretted the cynicism. "I don't know. Either way, it's tragic." My phone rang Theodore again. "I assume you've seen the news," he said without preamble. "About Vanessa?" "Yes, just now. Richard's attorneys are using it to push back even harder on the settlement. They're claiming your demands drove her to this, that you're engaging in a vindictive campaign that's now endangering lives." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's absurd. I've never even spoken to the woman." "I know," Theodore said soothingly, "but they're trying to use this to change the narrative. If they can paint you as the vindictive wife persecuting the helpless mistress, then public opinion shifts." I finished, understanding the strategy all too well. Richard had always been a master of shaping perceptions. "What do you recommend?" "We stay the course," Theodore said firmly. "The facts are on our side. But it might be wise to issue a statement expressing concern for Miss Caldwell's well-being. Take the high road." After hanging up, I explained the situation to James, who looked as disgusted as I felt. "Classic dad," he muttered, using someone else's tragedy to further his own agenda. "We need to get ahead of this," I said, my public relations instincts kicking in despite my personal turmoil. "Call Sarah. She knows people at the hospital. See if she can find out Vanessa's real condition. I'll draft a statement." The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Sarah confirmed that Vanessa had indeed been admitted following an overdose, though whether it was intentional remained unclear. Sophie arrived with breakfast none of us would eat and news that the media presence outside had doubled. By mid-morning, we had issued a brief statement. "The Harrington family is saddened to hear of Miss Caldwell's hospitalization and wishes her a full recovery. Out of respect for her privacy and medical needs, we will be making no further comment on this personal matter." It was carefully worded to express appropriate concern without accepting any responsibility or connection to her condition. The high road, as Theodore had advised. We were gathered in the kitchen, reviewing the draft settlement agreement Theodore had sent over, When Nathan burst in, his face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this," he said, placing his laptop on the counter. "I've been digging deeper into Dad's financial records." We crowded around as Nathan pulled up a series of spreadsheets and bank statements. "Remember how I said Dad was moving money offshore? Well, it's worse than we thought. He wasn't just hiding money from us, he was hiding it from the IRS, from the SEC, from basically everyone." Nathan pointed to specific transactions, large sums moving through a series of shell companies before disappearing into accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and other tax havens. "The total is over $15 million, he said, his voice tight with anger. "Money that should have been declared as income, that should have been part of the company's reported assets." I felt physically ill. Tax evasion, securities fraud, the kinds of crimes that sent people to federal prison. "When did this start?" James asked, his CEO mind already calculating the potential liability for the company. Nathan scrolled through the documents. "The earliest transfers I can find are from about 4 years ago, right around the time Dad hired Vanessa." The implication hung in the air. Had she been involved from the beginning? Was their affair connected to the financial fraud? "There's more," Nathan continued, clicking to another screen. "I found emails between Dad and Vanessa discussing a house in Geneva. Apparently, he bought it last year through one of the shell companies. $7 million. $7 million? Sophie gasped. "That's a lot of money to spend on a mistress," James finished grimly. "Or an escape plan," I said quietly, the pieces suddenly fitting together. The offshore accounts, the foreign property, the jewelry. I looked at my children, the truth dawning on me with sickening clarity. He was planning to leave. Not just me, all of us. He was setting up a new life with her, somewhere beyond the reach of U.S. authorities. The kitchen fell silent as we absorbed this revelation. Richard hadn't just betrayed me as a husband. He had betrayed the entire family, the company, everything we had built together. "What do we do with this information?" Sarah finally asked. It was the question we were all grappling with. Exposing Richard's financial crimes would protect the company from future liability, but it would also almost certainly result in criminal charges. Despite everything, he was still their father, still the man I had loved for most of my adult life. "We use it as leverage," I decided finally. "These records give us the upper hand in the settlement negotiations. Richard knows what we have, and he knows what it could mean for him." "But Mom," Nathan protested, "what he did was illegal. Seriously illegal." "I know," I said softly. "And there may come a point where we have no choice but to turn this information over to the authorities. But for now, let's see if we can resolve this privately for the sake of the family and the company." The doorbell rang, interrupting our discussion. James went to check the security camera, then returned with a surprised expression. "It's Judge Kingsley," he said. "And he's with someone I don't recognize." I smoothed my hair and straightened my shoulders, once again donning the armor of composure that had become second nature. "Show them in." Marcus Kingsley entered the kitchen with his usual commanding presence, followed by a severe-looking woman in a tailored suit who he introduced as Special Agent Rebecca Torres of the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. My heart sank. "Agent Torres," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What can we do for you?" She surveyed the room, her gaze lingering on Nathan's laptop with its incriminating spreadsheets still displayed. "Mrs. Harrington, I'm here because we've received information about potential financial irregularities involving Harrington Enterprises and your husband, Richard Harrington." "What kind of information?" James asked, stepping into his role as CEO. "Banking records, wire transfers to foreign accounts, possible tax evasion and securities fraud," Agent Torres replied crisply. "Judge Kingsley contacted our office this morning with concerns based on information he received in his capacity as a trustee of your family holdings." I turned to Marcus, feeling betrayed all over again. "You went to the FBI without consulting me?" Marcus met my gaze steadily. "I had to, Eleanor. Once I saw the extent of what Richard had done, I had a legal obligation to report it. As a judge, I couldn't look the other way." "We understand this is a difficult time for your family," Agent Torres added, her tone softening slightly. The courthouse incident yesterday has made the situation very public. But financial crimes of this magnitude can't be ignored or handled privately. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to process this new development. Everything was spiraling beyond my control, each new revelation bringing fresh complications. What happens now? I asked, opening my eyes to face the reality before me. We'll need to examine all the financial records, Agent Torres said. And we'll need to speak with Mr. Harrington. Today, if possible. Nathan looked at me uncertainly, seeking direction. I nodded slowly. Show Agent Torres everything you've found, Nathan. James, call Theodore and have him meet us here as soon as possible. As Nathan began walking the FBI agent through his discoveries, Marcus pulled me aside. I'm sorry it had to be this way, Eleanor, he said quietly. But Richard crossed a line. What he's done could potentially damage hundreds of people, investors, employees, clients. I know, I admitted. I just wanted to protect my children from seeing their father prosecuted. Marcus's eyes softened. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their actions, even when those people are family. Within an hour, my kitchen had become the center of an expanding investigation. Theodore arrived with 2 associates, reviewing the FBI's documentation and advising us on our rights and responsibilities. James was on the phone with the company's general counsel, discussing the potential implications for Harrington Enterprises. In the midst of this controlled chaos, my phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. I stepped onto the back patio for privacy before answering. Eleanor. His voice was tight with barely controlled fury. What the hell have you done? I could ask you the same question. I replied calmly. For years, apparently. The FBI just showed up at my apartment. He continued as if I hadn't spoken, with questions about offshore accounts and wire transfers. This is your doing, isn't it? Your revenge for Vanessa? No, Richard. This is your doing. The consequences of your own choices coming home to roost. He was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, more intimate. The voice he had used for decades when trying to persuade me of something. Eleanor, we need to talk. Just the 2 of us. There are things you don't understand, context you're missing. I can explain everything. I almost laughed at the familiarity of the approach. How many times had he used this same tactic to smooth over business disputes or social faux pas? The reasonable voice, the promise of clarification, the implication that I simply didn't understand the complexities of the situation. The FBI is here now, Richard, I said simply. In our kitchen, looking at financial records that Nathan found. There's nothing left to explain. A sharp intake of breath. Nathan gave them the records? Our son betrayed me. The genuine pain in his voice caught me off guard. After everything Richard had done, he still saw Nathan's actions as a betrayal rather than the inevitable consequence of his own behavior. Nathan didn't betray you, I said, my voice hardening. He protected the family and the company from your crimes, from your betrayal. You've turned my children against me, Richard said bitterly. Are you satisfied now? You did that yourself, I replied. When you chose Vanessa over your family. When you stole from the company we built together. When you planned to abandon us all for a new life with your mistress. Is that what you think? He sounded almost amused now. That Vanessa and I were running away together? Is that the story you've built in your head? Something in his tone made me pause. What do you mean? You've never really understood me, Eleanor. Not in 35 years of marriage. You saw what you wanted to see, the devoted husband, the brilliant businessman, the family man. You never looked deeper. Then enlighten me, Richard, I said, suddenly tired of the games. What didn't I understand? He sighed, a sound filled with a strange mixture of relief and resignation. Vanessa was never the end game. She was a means to an end. A willing participant in the plan, yes, but ultimately just another tool. A tool for what? I pressed, though a cold certainty was already forming in my mind. Freedom, he said simply. From this life that's been suffocating me for decades. From the constant performance of being Richard Harrington, real estate mogul and family man. From you. The words struck like physical blows, but I kept my voice steady. So, the offshore accounts, the house in Geneva? Were for me, he confirmed. Just for me. Vanessa thought we would be together, of course. That was the carrot I dangled to secure her cooperation. But once the money was safely transferred and the new identity established, she would have found herself alone, just like everyone else. The calculated cruelty of it stunned me. Not just toward me and our children, but toward Vanessa as well. He had used us all, played us against each other, manipulated our emotions and trust for his own selfish ends. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, genuinely curious. Richard laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. Because it doesn't matter anymore. The plan is ruined. The FBI is involved. There's no escape now.
He paused.
And because I want you to know that this wasn't about replacing you with a younger model, Eleanor. It was about escaping you altogether. I should have been devastated by this final cruelty, this ultimate rejection. Instead, I felt an odd sense of release, as if the last chain binding me to this man had finally broken. Goodbye, Richard, I said quietly, and ended the call before he could respond. When I returned to the kitchen, the activity had intensified. Agent Torres was on the phone, speaking rapidly about search warrants and account freezes. Nathan and James were huddled with Theodore, reviewing legal documents. Sarah and Sophie sat at the counter, their faces somber as they watched their family's private drama become a federal case. Mom, Sophie called, noticing my expression. What's wrong? Who was on the phone? I looked at my children, these remarkable adults who had rallied around me despite their own pain and confusion, who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over illusion. Your father, I said, taking a seat among them. He just confirmed what we already suspected. The money, the offshore accounts, the foreign property, it was all part of an escape plan. He was preparing to disappear, to start a new life without any of us. Even Vanessa was just a pawn in his game. Sarah gasped. He admitted that? Just like that. He has nothing left to lose, I said simply. The FBI is at his apartment. His plan is exposed. The mask has finally dropped completely. James shook his head in disbelief. All these years, we never really knew him at all. No, I agreed sadly. We knew the version of himself he chose to show us. The real Richard Harrington has been hidden all along. As the day wore on, the investigation gathered momentum. Agent Torres left with copies of all the financial records Nathan had uncovered, promising to keep us informed of developments. Theodore advised us on the potential legal ramifications for the company and the family trust. Marcus offered his support as both trustee and friend. By evening, we were all exhausted, emotionally and physically drained by the relentless cascade of revelations and decisions. The children insisted on staying with me, unwilling to leave me alone with my thoughts in the too large house. As we sat together in the living room, the television muted but still showing news coverage of our family drama, I looked around at these four incredible people I had raised. Despite everything, despite the public humiliation and private betrayal, we were still intact. Still a family. I want you all to know, I said suddenly, needing to voice what was in my heart, that no matter what happens with your father, no matter what the investigation reveals or what the press says about us, I am so proud of each of you. The way you've handled this crisis, the integrity you've shown, it's everything I ever hoped to instill in you. Sophie's eyes filled with tears.
We learned it from you, Mom.
The way you've faced all this with such dignity and strength. Not always, I admitted with a small smile. There have been plenty of tears and moments of despair behind closed doors. That's strength too, Sarah said wisely. Feeling everything but not letting it destroy you. We were interrupted by James's phone ringing. He answered, his expression growing more serious as he listened. When he hung up, he looked stunned. That was Agent Torres, he said slowly. They can't find Dad. He's not at the apartment, not at the office. His phone is off, and his car is still in the parking garage at his building. A chill ran through me. He's running.
How?
Nathan asked. They're monitoring the airports, the borders. His accounts are frozen. Where could he go? I thought about the Richard I had known for 35 years. His meticulous planning, his backup strategies, his uncanny ability to anticipate obstacles. He would have prepared for this possibility. An alternate identity, cash reserves, transportation that couldn't be traced. Do you think he'll succeed? Sophie asked quietly. In disappearing? I considered the question carefully. No, I said finally. He's resourceful, but he's also arrogant. That arrogance will lead him to make mistakes. And the authorities have resources he can't match. But as I spoke the reassuring words, a kernel of doubt remained. Richard had always been 3 steps ahead, always planning for contingencies no one else had considered. If anyone could vanish despite the full force of federal law enforcement, it would be him. The next morning brought a fresh wave of media coverage. Richard's disappearance had leaked to the press, transforming an already sensational story of infidelity and corporate intrigue into a full-blown manhunt narrative. Our driveway was once again blocked by news vans, reporters shouting questions as we tried to leave for the office. At Harrington Enterprises, the mood was somber. Employees spoke in hushed tones, casting curious glances as James and I made our way to the executive suite. The FBI had arrived ahead of us, agents methodically going through Richard's office, boxing files and electronic devices for evidence. Mrs. Harrington, Agent Torres greeted me, looking as crisp and professional as she had the day before despite what must have been a sleepless night. We need to talk about your husband's potential whereabouts. For the next hour, I answered questions about Richard's habits, his connections, places he might go to ground. I provided names of old friends, business associates, relatives, anyone who might potentially help him evade capture. What about properties? Agent Torres asked. Beyond the ones we already know about? I hesitated, thinking. Richard always believed in diversifying assets. Over the years, we've acquired properties in various locations, vacation homes, investment properties, undeveloped land. We need a complete list, she said, sliding a notepad toward me. I began writing, listing the beach house in Hilton Head, the ski condo in Aspen, the investment properties in Florida and Arizona. Then I paused, a memory surfacing. There's a hunting cabin, I said slowly, in North Georgia, near the Appalachian Trail. Richard bought it about 10 years ago through one of our subsidiary companies. It's very remote, no close neighbors, accessible only by a private road. You think he might go there? Agent Torres asked, her interest clearly piqued. It's not luxurious, I said, considering. And Richard has always preferred comfort. But it's isolated, self-sufficient with its own generator and well. And most importantly, few people know about it. Within minutes, Agent Torres was organizing a team to investigate the cabin. I provided detailed directions, drawing from memories of the few weekends Richard had dragged us there for family bonding that inevitably devolved into him taking business calls while the rest of us swatted mosquitoes. As the FBI team departed, I turned to James. Do you think he's really there? James shrugged. It's a logical hiding place. But Dad is rarely logical when he's desperate. We spent the rest of the day trying to maintain a semblance of normality amidst the chaos. James held meetings with department heads to reassure them about the company's stability. I spoke with key clients, using every ounce of my social grace to downplay the severity of the situation. By mid-afternoon, we received word that the FBI had reached the cabin and found it empty, though with signs of recent occupation, fresh food in the refrigerator, a still warm fireplace, clothing in the drawers. Richard had been there, perhaps just hours before they arrived. The hunt continued, expanding to include local law enforcement, border patrol, even international agencies. Richard Harrington's face appeared on news broadcasts nationwide, his transformation from respected businessman to fugitive, financial criminal complete. Days passed with no sign of Richard. The manhunt dominated local news, with regular updates and exclusive interviews with people who claimed to know him, former employees, business rivals, social acquaintances suddenly willing to share their suspicions about the man they had once courted for connections and favors. I watched it all with a strange detachment, as if the Richard Harrington they described, the cunning fraudster, the cold manipulator, the the man who had systematically deceived everyone around him, was a stranger rather than the man I had shared my life with for over 3 decades. The company struggled under the weight of the scandal. Despite James's steady leadership and my best efforts to reassure clients, several major investors pulled out of ongoing projects. The Midtown development was put on hold indefinitely. The stock price of our publicly traded subsidiary dropped nearly 40% in a week. Through it all, my health continued to improve, my body growing stronger even as the life I had known crumbled around me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had nearly died, only to recover in time to watch everything else die instead. It was during this limbo, this suspended animation of waiting for the next blow to fall, that Vanessa Caldwell re-entered our lives. She had been released from the hospital and immediately reached out through her attorney, requesting a meeting. "Absolutely not," James said firmly when I mentioned the request at our morning strategy session. "That woman has caused enough damage." "I agree," Sophie added. "She's probably looking for a payoff or trying to sell her story to the highest bidder." I tapped my fingers thoughtfully on the conference room table. Or she might have information about Richard's whereabouts. She was closer to him than any of us in the last few years. "That's exactly why we can't trust anything she says," Sarah pointed out. "She's manipulative and clearly unstable." I understood their concerns, but something told me that Vanessa might be a key to understanding the full scope of Richard's deception. "I'll meet with her," I decided. "But not alone. Theodore will accompany me, and we'll meet on neutral ground." My children protested, but I held firm. After so many years of accommodating others, of prioritizing harmony over truth, I was finally learning to trust my own judgment. The meeting was arranged for the following day at Theodore's law office. I arrived early, taking a moment in the restroom to assess my appearance. The woman in the mirror looked different from the Eleanor Harrington of just weeks ago. Thinner, yes, with new lines of strain around her eyes and mouth. But there was something else, a clarity in her gaze, a set to her jaw that spoke of hard-won wisdom. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, escorted by a harried-looking young attorney who was clearly out of his depth. She had lost weight during her hospital stay, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame. The defiant glamour of the courthouse confrontation was gone, replaced by a subdued appearance that might have been calculated to evoke sympathy. "Mrs. Harrington," she said as we settled into Theodore's conference room, her voice lacking the venom I had heard at the hospital and courthouse. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." I nodded, maintaining a neutral expression. "You said you had information to share." "I'm listening." She glanced at her attorney, who nodded encouragingly. "I want to make a deal," she said bluntly. "Immunity for what I know about Richard's financial crimes and current whereabouts." Theodore leaned forward. "Ms. Caldwell, we aren't prosecutors. We can't offer immunity." "No, but you have influence," she insisted. "The FBI agent in charge of the case respects Mrs. Harrington. A recommendation from her would carry weight." I studied the younger woman carefully. The desperation in her eyes was real, but there was something else. Calculation, perhaps even a hint of triumph. "What exactly do you know, Vanessa?" She straightened, seeming to gather her courage. "Everything. I know about all the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the property transfers. I helped set them up. I have access codes, account numbers, transaction records that even your son hasn't found yet." "And Richard's current location?" I pressed. A flicker of something, pain, regret, anger, crossed her face. "I don't know exactly where he is now, but I know where he's going. We had a plan. A final destination where no one could touch him."
"We."
I raised an eyebrow. "You still believe you were part of his escape plan?" Vanessa's composure slipped slightly. "I know what he told you on the phone. That he was planning to leave me behind, too. He's lying. We had an agreement, a future plan together." I almost pitied her then. Another woman deceived by Richard's promises, another life he had been willing to discard when it no longer served his purposes. "What's your proof?" Theodore asked ever the pragmatic attorney. "Why should we believe you have valuable information?" In response, Vanessa reached into her purse and removed a small leather-bound notebook. "Richard's personal ledger. He kept track of everything here, accounts, passwords, contacts for forged documents, transportation arrangements. She slid the notebook across the table. I hesitated before touching it, as if it might burn my fingers. The small book represented the final betrayal, the tangible evidence of years of deception. "Why give us this?" I asked, still not reaching for the notebook. "Why not take it directly to the FBI?" Vanessa's gaze hardened. "Because they'd arrest me on the spot. I need protection. I need guarantees. And why come to me? After everything that's happened between us?" She laughed then, a brittle sound with no humor in it. "Because you're Eleanor Harrington, the woman who rose from her deathbed to outmaneuver the great Richard Harrington, the society matron who revealed herself to be a formidable opponent. If anyone can convince the FBI to cut me a deal, it's you." The flattery was transparent, but the logic was sound. I did have credibility with the investigation team. And if Vanessa's information was as valuable as she claimed, it might be worth the effort to help her. "I'll speak with Agent Torres," I said finally, reaching for the notebook. "I make no promises, but if this information leads to Richard's capture and the recovery of the stolen funds, I'll recommend leniency." Relief washed over Vanessa's face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're not what I expected." "No," I agreed, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'm discovering that myself." After Vanessa and her attorney left, Theodore and I examined the notebook. It was meticulous, written in Richard's precise handwriting, accounts, dates, amounts, contacts. A roadmap of betrayal spanning years. "This is comprehensive," Theodore said, clearly impressed despite himself. "With this, the FBI could potentially recover most of the money." But something was nagging at me, a sense that we were still missing a piece of the puzzle. "It's too perfect," I murmured, flipping through the pages again. Why would Richard keep such detailed records of his own crimes? And why would he leave this with Vanessa if he was planning to abandon her as he claimed? Theodore frowned. "You think it's a setup?" "I'm not sure," I admitted. "But Richard never did anything without multiple layers of purpose. This notebook feels convenient." Nevertheless, we contacted Agent Torres, who arrived within the hour to take possession of the evidence. She was cautiously optimistic about its value, but made no commitments regarding Vanessa's potential deal. "We'll need to verify this information," she explained. "If it checks out, if it leads to Harrington or the recovery of substantial assets, then we can discuss immunity or reduce charges for Ms. Caldwell." I returned home that evening to find my children waiting anxiously for news of the meeting. As I recounted the encounter and the notebook, I could see their skepticism mirroring my own. "It has to be a trick," Nathan insisted. "Dad would never leave that kind of evidence lying around, especially not with someone as volatile as Vanessa." "Maybe he didn't have a choice," Sarah suggested. "Maybe she took it without his knowledge. Or maybe," James said slowly, "this is exactly what Dad wants us to find." We fell silent, considering the implications. What if the notebook was a deliberate distraction, designed to send investigators down a carefully constructed rabbit hole while Richard executed his real escape plan? The answer came 2 days later in the middle of the night. My phone rang at 3:17 a.m., startling me from a fitful sleep. Agent Torres's voice was tight with urgency. "Mrs. Harrington, I need you to come to the FBI field office immediately. We've found something concerning." Fully awake now, I sat up. "Concerning how? Have you found Richard?" "Not exactly," she hedged. "It's better if we discuss this in person. I've sent a car for you. It should be arriving shortly." The federal building was brightly lit despite the hour, agents moving purposefully through the halls as I was escorted to a conference room. Agent Torres was waiting, along with several other agents and a man I recognized as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Agent Torres said, gesturing for me to sit. "We've been analyzing the information from Ms. Caldwell's notebook, cross-referencing it with our other evidence." "And," I prompted, anxiety building. The U.S. Attorney leaned forward. "Mrs. Harrington, are you familiar with a company called Artemis Holdings?" I frowned, thinking.
Vaguely.
"I believe it's one of our subsidiary investment vehicles." Richard set it up several years ago for a development in Savannah that never materialized. That's what the paperwork indicates, he agreed. But Artemis Holdings isn't just a dormant subsidiary. It's the central hub of your husband's financial schemes. All the offshore accounts, all the stolen funds, eventually trace back to Artemis. I don't understand, I said, confusion mounting. What does this have to do with me being called here in the middle of the night? Agent Torres slid a document across the table. This is the incorporation paperwork for Artemis Holdings. Please look at the signature page. I glanced down, expecting to see Richard's familiar signature. Instead, I froze, staring at the name written in flowing script at the bottom of the page. Eleanor Harrington. That's not my signature, I said immediately, looking up with alarm. I never signed this. I never even saw this document before. We suspected as much, Agent Torres said grimly. It appears to be a forgery. A very good one, but still detectable by our forensic experts. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a new wave of apprehension. Why would Richard forge my signature on this document? The U.S. Attorney's expression was sympathetic but serious. Because, Mrs. Harrington, he was setting you up to take the fall if his schemes were ever discovered. According to the paper trail, you are the primary owner and officer of Artemis Holdings. Your signature, forged, but convincingly so, appears on numerous financial documents, authorizing transfers, establishing accounts, purchasing properties. The room seemed to tilt slightly as the full implication hit me. He was framing me, I whispered. All this time, he was creating evidence that I was the criminal, that I was responsible for the fraud. It appears that way, Agent Torres confirmed. The notebook Ms. Caldwell provided? It doesn't contain Richard's actual financial information. It contains a carefully constructed alternate narrative that would have led us to evidence incriminating you. I closed my eyes, trying to process this new betrayal. It was breathtaking in its calculation, its sheer malevolence. Richard hadn't just been stealing from our company and planning to abandon me. He had been systematically creating a false trail that would have sent me to prison if his crimes were discovered. Vanessa, I said suddenly, opening my eyes. Was she part of this? Agent Torres nodded. We believe so. The timing of her approach to you, the specific information in the notebook, it was all designed to accelerate the investigation in a particular direction.
Toward you.
Have you arrested her? I asked, anger beginning to replace shock. We tried, the agent admitted. But she's disappeared. Her apartment is empty, her phone disconnected. We believe she may have rejoined your husband. Of course. The overdose, the hospital stay, the apparent break with Richard, all part of the performance. Another layer of the deception designed to lend credibility to her eventual betrayal of Richard when she came to me with the notebook. So they're both gone, I said flatly, with millions of dollars of stolen money. And I was supposed to be left holding the bag. That was clearly the plan, the U.S. attorney agreed. But it failed. We've found enough evidence of the forgeries and Richard's actual involvement to clear you of any suspicion. You're not a suspect, Mrs. Harrington. You're another victim. Victim. The word stung, even as it relieved. I had never seen myself as a victim. Not when I discovered Richard's affair, not when I overheard Vanessa's cruel words in the hospital, not even when I learned of his financial crimes. But this elaborate frame-up, this attempt to destroy not just my heart and my family, but my very freedom, this was a level of betrayal I had not imagined possible. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. We continue the investigation and the manhunt, Agent Torres said. We've expanded our search internationally. Interpol has been notified. All the information from the notebook is being carefully examined for hidden clues or deliberate misdirection. I nodded, processing. And Harrington Enterprises? My family? The company will face scrutiny, the U.S. attorney admitted. But we're focusing our efforts on Richard Harrington and his accomplices. Based on what we've seen so far, the company itself appears to be a victim of his embezzlement rather than a vehicle for fraud. As dawn broke, I left the federal building with a strange mixture of emotions, relief that I had been cleared, rage at the depth of Richard's betrayal, fear for what might still be uncovered, determination to protect what remained of our family legacy. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings, FBI interviews, and corporate damage control. Slowly, the full scope of Richard's deception emerged. For years, he had been leading a double life, the respected businessman and family man by day, the architect of an elaborate financial fraud by night. He had stolen not just from our company but from clients, investors, even my personal accounts. And all the while, he had been carefully constructing a parallel narrative, a false trail of evidence that would have led investigators to me if his crimes were discovered. My signatures forged on documents. My name on offshore accounts I knew nothing about. My supposed fingerprints on every aspect of the fraud. The discovery of this elaborate frame-up changed the public narrative. The media, which had initially portrayed me as either a clueless trophy wife or a vengeful spouse, now painted me as the ultimate victim, betrayed not just romantically but criminally, nearly sent to prison for my husband's crimes. I hated the victim label, but I used the sympathy it generated to begin rebuilding. James led Harrington Enterprises with a transparency and integrity that gradually restored investor confidence. Nathan redesigned our financial systems to prevent any similar fraud in the future. Sophie and Sarah worked tirelessly to maintain our charitable commitments despite the financial strain. And I found myself emerging from the shadow of Eleanor Harrington, Richard's wife, to discover Eleanor Harrington herself. The woman who had always been there, beneath the carefully maintained facade of the perfect corporate spouse. 3 months after Richard's disappearance, I was in my office at Harrington Enterprises, reviewing plans for a scaled-down version of the Midtown project, when my phone rang. Agent Torres's name flashed on the screen. "We've found them," she said without preamble. "Richard and Vanessa. They're in Argentina, living under assumed names. Local authorities made the arrest an hour ago." I sat back in my chair, a strange numbness spreading through me. After months of anticipation, the moment had finally arrived, and I found myself unsure how to feel. "Both of them," I confirmed. "You're certain it's them?" "Positive identification," she assured me. "They were living in a villa outside Buenos Aires. We found approximately $8 million in assets, property, vehicles, cash, jewelry. We're working on the extradition now." "My mother's ring?" I asked, the small detail suddenly important among the millions. Agent Torres's voice softened. "Yes, Mrs. Harrington. The ring was recovered, along with several other pieces we believe were taken from your personal collection. They'll be returned to you once they're no longer needed as evidence." After thanking her and ending the call, I sat in silence for several minutes, absorbing the news. Richard was found. The man who had shared my bed, fathered my children, built a business with me, and then betrayed me in every way possible was now in custody thousands of miles away. I called my children one by one, sharing the news. Their reactions ranged from James's grim satisfaction to Sarah's quiet tears to Sophie's anger to Nathan's conflicted relief. We agreed to meet for dinner that evening to discuss what would happen next. The news broke publicly an hour later, and once again, our family drama became headline material. Reporters gathered outside our offices and homes, shouting questions, seeking reactions. The story had everything: money, betrayal, international manhunts, justice served. But for us, it wasn't a story. It was our lives, forever altered by one man's deception. That evening, as my children and I gathered in my dining room, the conversation inevitably turned to Richard's eventual return and trial. "Will you testify against him?" Sophie asked, swirling her wine thoughtfully. I considered the question carefully. "If necessary, yes. The truth needs to be told, no matter how painful." "What about visiting him?" Nathan asked quietly. "When he's back in the country, in custody, will any of us go?" The question hung in the air, each of us contemplating what it would mean to face Richard now, knowing everything we knew. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Part of me never wants to see him again. Another part needs to look him in the eye, to understand how he could do this to us." "You don't owe him anything," James said firmly. "Not even closure." "Perhaps not," I agreed. but I might owe it to myself. As the night wore on, our conversation shifted from Richard to the future, the company's next projects, Sarah's upcoming medical conference, Sophie's children's school achievements, Nathan's new apartment. Life continuing despite everything. When my children finally left, I found myself alone in the house that had once symbolized my perfect life. I wandered from room to room, touching familiar objects, remembering moments, both genuine and false, that had filled these spaces. In the study, I paused before the family portrait taken on our 30th anniversary. Richard and I in the center, flanked by our children, all smiling as if we would be happy forever. I lifted the heavy frame from the wall and set it aside, revealing the wall safe behind it. Inside was a single envelope I had placed there the day after learning of Richard's financial crimes. I removed it now, carrying it to the desk and sitting down before opening it. Inside was a letter I had written to myself during those first raw days of discovery, a reminder of what I had learned, what I had lost, and what I had found within myself during the crucible of betrayal. Dear Eleanor, by the time you read this, months or perhaps years will have passed. The worst of the pain may have faded. The public interest will have moved on to newer scandals. Your children will have adjusted to their father's true nature. You may have even begun to doubt your memories of what happened. This is why I'm writing to you now. While the wounds are still fresh, the betrayal still sharp enough to cut. Remember this feeling, not to nurture bitterness, but to honor the truth. Richard betrayed you, not just as a husband, but as a human being. He tried to destroy you completely. He failed. You survived. More than survived, you fought back. You protected your children. You saved the company. You reclaimed your life. Whatever happens in the future, whatever twists this story may still take, remember that you are not defined by what was done to you, but by how you responded to it. Not as Richard's victim, but as your own champion. The woman you were before, the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the keeper of appearances, she served her purpose for many years. But the woman you are becoming, stronger, wiser, more authentic, she has only just begun her journey. Trust her. Follow her. Become fully who you were always meant to be, with love and respect for both who you were and who you are becoming. Eleanor. I folded the letter carefully, returning it to its envelope. The words were still true, perhaps even more so now that Richard had been found. An ending, yes, but also a beginning. The next morning, I woke early and did something I had been contemplating for weeks. I called a real estate agent and arranged to put the house on the market. The mansion had always been more Richard's dream than mine, a symbol of status, a showcase for success. I wanted something different now, something that reflected the woman I was becoming rather than the woman I had been. At the office, I gathered my executive team to discuss the news of Richard's capture and what it meant for the company going forward. The legal entanglements would continue for months, perhaps years, but the worst of the uncertainty was over. We've survived the crisis, I told them. Now it's time to rebuild, not just to where we were, but to something better, more transparent, more ethical, more aligned with values that will stand the test of time. As the meeting concluded, my assistant informed me that Agent Torres was waiting to speak with me. I found her in the reception area, holding a small velvet pouch. Mrs. Harrington. She greeted me with a rare smile. I have something for you. The forensics team finished with these items more quickly than expected. She handed me the pouch. I opened it carefully, tipping the contents into my palm. My mother's emerald-cut diamond ring. My grandmother's pearl earrings. The sapphire pendant from James. One by one, the pieces of my history that Richard had stolen returned to their rightful owner. Thank you, I said, closing my fingers around the treasures. These mean more to me than their monetary value. Agent Torres nodded understanding. There's something else you should know. During his initial questioning, Richard made a statement about you. I tensed. What kind of statement? He said, and I quote, "She was supposed to be dead by now. The aneurysm was supposed to take care of everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you saying? That my illness was that Richard somehow? We can't prove anything, Agent Torres said carefully. But given the timing, your collapse just as you were beginning to discover his infidelity, the convenient opportunity it gave him to accelerate his plans while you were incapacitated, we're looking into the possibility that your condition was helped along. That's not possible, I protested, though a cold certainty was already forming in my gut. An aneurysm is a medical condition. It can't be induced. Certain medications can raise blood pressure dramatically in susceptible individuals, she explained gently. We're having your medical records reviewed by specialists, and we've requested toxicology tests on samples taken during your hospitalization, if they're still available. I sank into a nearby chair, the jewelry clutched tightly in my palm. You're saying Richard may have tried to kill me. It's a possibility we're investigating, she confirmed. I wanted you to hear it from me rather than reading it in legal documents or hearing rumors. After Agent Torres left, I sat alone in my office, trying to process this new, almost incomprehensible betrayal. Not content with stealing from me, lying to me, framing me, Richard may have actually attempted to murder me. To end my life as casually as he had ended our marriage, as coldly as he had discarded our decades together. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had experienced before, white-hot and all-consuming. For a moment, I wanted nothing more than to fly to Argentina, to confront Richard in his cell, to demand answers for this final, unforgivable crime. But as the initial shock faded, something else took its place, a profound sense of liberation. If what Agent Torres suggested was true, then I had not just survived betrayal. I had cheated death itself. I had risen from what was meant to be my deathbed to reclaim not just my dignity and my family's legacy, but my very life. The realization was strangely empowering. Richard had tried everything, literally everything, to destroy me, and he had failed completely. I was still here, still standing, still building a future he had tried to steal from me. That evening, I gathered my children once more, this time at Sarah's home, to share this latest development. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to horror to rage, but beneath it all was the same stunned recognition that the man they had called father was a stranger to us all. If this is true, James said, his voice tight with controlled fury, then he deserves every year they can possibly give him. Every single one. I can't believe we're even having this conversation, Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. Attempted murder? Our father? Nathan had gone completely pale. All those times he asked about your medication, about your treatment. I thought he was concerned. I thought he cared. He was gathering information, I said quietly. Learning what might work, what might look natural. Sarah, with her medical knowledge, was the most practical. The FBI will need to prove it. Blood tests, medication analysis. It won't be easy after all this time. Whether they can prove it or not, I said, reaching out to take each of their hands, we know the truth now. About who Richard really is. About what he was willing to do. How can you be so calm? Sophie asked, searching my face. If someone tried to kill me, I'd be terrified, broken, consumed with hatred. I finished for her. I've been all those things over the past months. But right now, what I feel most strongly is gratitude. Gratitude. Nathan echoed incredulously. I nodded. Gratitude that I'm alive. That I'm here with all of you. That despite everything Richard did, everything he took from us, he didn't take what matters most. We stayed together late into the night, talking, crying, occasionally even laughing as we shared memories that now had to be re-examined in light of what we knew. It was painful, but there was healing in it too. The beginning of acceptance, of moving forward with open eyes. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as Richard Harrington was led in for his arraignment. After a lengthy extradition process, he had finally been returned to U.S. soil to face a litany of charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, tax evasion, and, most recently, attempted murder. He looked older, thinner, the polished executive veneer stripped away by months in Argentine and then American custody. When he saw me sitting in the front row, his step faltered momentarily, surprise and something like fear flickering across his face. I met his gaze steadily, neither flinching nor gloating. I had debated whether to attend this hearing, whether seeing Richard would reopen wounds better left to heal. But in the end, I needed to be here, not for him, but for myself. To face the man who had nearly destroyed me and know with absolute certainty that he had failed. The proceedings were brief, the charges read, the plea of not guilty entered. Richard was denied bail, deemed both a flight risk and potentially dangerous. As he was led away, he glanced back once more, his expression unreadable. Outside the courthouse, the media was waiting, cameras and microphones thrust toward me as I emerged. For months, I had declined interviews, issued only brief statements through attorneys. But today felt different. Today, I was ready to speak. Mrs. Harrington, how did it feel to see your husband in court today? I paused on the courthouse steps, gathering my thoughts. The man in that courtroom is not my husband. My husband was a fiction, a character Richard Harrington played for 35 years. I don't know who that man really is, and I'm not sure he does either. Are you convinced he tried to kill you? The evidence suggests that possibility, I said carefully. The investigation is ongoing. But whether he intended my death or merely took advantage of my illness, the betrayal is the same. How are you coping with everything that's happened? I smiled then, a genuine smile that surprised even me. I'm not just coping. I'm living, building a new life, running a company that's stronger and more ethical than before, enjoying my children and grandchildren, writing a book about financial fraud awareness for women. Do you have any message for Richard Harrington? The question gave me pause. Did I have anything left to say to the man who had shared my life for decades only to try to destroy it? Any final words for the father of my children who had betrayed us all so completely? Yes, I said finally. Thank you. The reporters looked confused. Thank you? For what? For failing, I said simply. His failure freed me to discover who I really am, who I was always meant to be. As I walked away from the courthouse that day, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be trials, both literal and figurative, difficult days and painful memories. The financial damage would take years to fully repair. The emotional scars would never completely fade. But I was Eleanor Harrington, not Richard's wife, not the perfect corporate spouse, not the society matron or the betrayed woman or the victim of elaborate fraud. Just Eleanor, stronger than I knew, wiser than before, ready to write the next chapter of my life with my own hand. And for the first time in decades, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. For years later, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Ritz-Carlton, looking out at the sea of faces before me. Business leaders, politicians, community advocates, all gathered for the annual Women in Business Leadership Gala, where I was being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. Richard was serving a 25-year sentence for his crimes, the attempted murder charge eventually proven through painstaking forensic work and the testimony of a pharmacy assistant who remembered Richard picking up a prescription that wasn't his, a medication known to cause dangerous blood pressure spikes in patients with my condition. Vanessa had received a lesser sentence in exchange for her testimony, though her cooperation had come too late to earn the full immunity she had sought. Last I heard, she was halfway through her 8-year term, taking business classes in prison. Harrington Enterprises had not just survived but thrived under James's leadership, with Sophie now serving as creative director and Nathan as chief technology officer. Sarah had returned to her medical practice full-time, finding her calling in neurosurgery inspired, she said, by what had happened to me. As for me, I had finally sold the Buckhead mansion, moving to a sleek modern apartment in Midtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and none of the oppressive history of my marital home. I had written a book about financial literacy for women that had become an unexpected bestseller. I had started a foundation to help victims of financial abuse rebuild their lives. And I had found, to my own surprise, a capacity for joy I had forgotten existed. 4 years ago, I began my acceptance speech, fingering the simple pendant at my throat, a phoenix rising, a gift from my children on the day Richard was sentenced. I thought my life was ending. Not just because of health challenges, but because everything I had built, everything I had believed in, was revealed to be built on deception. The audience was silent, attentive. My story had become well known, featured in newspapers, magazines, even a documentary film. What I discovered in the ashes of that life was something unexpected. The woman I was always meant to be. The woman who had been there all along, waiting for the chance to emerge. I smiled, scanning the faces before me. My children in the front row, beaming with pride, friends who had stood by me through the darkest days, colleagues who had helped rebuild what had been damaged. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I'm living proof of that, quite literally. A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience. But strength isn't just about surviving. It's about thriving. It's about taking the worst experience of your life and transforming it into something meaningful. I touched the phoenix pendant again, drawing strength from its symbolism. Each of us has the capacity for this transformation. Each of us can rise from whatever has tried to destroy us: betrayal, loss, illness, failure. The key is to recognize that the ending of one story is simply the beginning of another. A better one that we write ourselves. As applause filled the ballroom, I looked out at the sea of faces and saw not just approval but recognition. Every person there had faced their own trials, their own moments of devastation and rebirth. My story was unique in its details, but universal in its message. Later that evening, as I prepared to leave, a young woman approached me, 30-something, professionally dressed, with a determined expression. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, extending her hand. "I've been wanting to meet you for so long. Your book changed my life." "I'm so glad," I replied, shaking her hand warmly. "May I ask how?" "I was in an emotionally abusive marriage," she said, her voice steady despite the difficult subject. "My husband controlled all our finances, made me doubt my own perceptions, isolated me from friends and family. Reading your story gave me the courage to leave, to start over." Her words touched me deeply. "And how are you doing now?" She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "I have my own business, my own home, my own life. I'm still healing, but I'm free. And I owe part of that to you, to knowing that someone else had faced even worse and not just survived, but triumphed." I squeezed her hand, deeply moved. "You triumphed because of your own strength. My story may have inspired you, but you did the hard work yourself." As I drove home that night, I thought about all the women like her, and men too, who had reached out to me over the past few years. People trapped in relationships built on deception. People whose financial security had been undermined by those they trusted. People searching for the courage to start over. My pain had found purpose. My humiliation had been transformed into a platform for helping others. My near death had given birth to a life more authentic and impactful than I could have imagined. In my apartment, I kicked off my heels and poured a glass of wine, walking to the wall of windows that overlooked the Atlanta skyline. The city glittered below, beautiful and full of possibility. My city now, in a way it had never been when I was one half of Richard and Eleanor Harrington. My phone chimed with a text from Sophie. "So proud of you tonight, Mom. Dad may have given us his name, but you gave us everything that matters." I smiled, typing back a thank you and a reminder about our Sunday brunch plans. Then I set the phone aside and simply stood there, taking in the view, the moment, the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. The woman who had lain in that hospital bed 4 years ago, overhearing her husband's mistress claim her life while she was still living it, that woman would never have imagined this future. She had been too broken, too betrayed, too consumed with the life that was slipping away. But somewhere in that broken heart, a seed of strength had remained. A core of dignity that refused to be destroyed. A spark of the woman I had always been beneath the careful facade of the perfect wife. That spark had become a flame, and that flame had consumed everything false in my life, leaving only what was genuine and valuable. Like gold refined by fire, I had emerged from the crucible of betrayal purified, strengthened, transformed. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard had spent decades constructing elaborate deceptions, manipulating everyone around him, stealing and scheming for what he thought would make him happy. And he had ended up with nothing, His reputation destroyed, his freedom gone, his children estranged, his future reduced to a prison cell and the hollow knowledge of his own failures. While I, the woman he had tried to discard, to frame, even to kill, I had everything that mattered. Family who loved me, work that fulfilled me, a legacy of integrity, and most precious of all, the freedom to be fully myself, without apology or pretense. As I raised my glass to the glittering city below, I offered a silent toast, not to survival, though I had certainly survived, not to justice, though justice had been served, but to rebirth, to the woman I had become through fire, to the life I had claimed from the ashes of betrayal, to the inheritance that Richard had never intended to leave me, but that had proven more valuable than all the wealth he had tried to steal, the discovery of my own indomitable spirit, and that, I knew with bone-deep certainty, was a legacy that could never be taken away.